Correct guess, but unfortunately there's no prize. The smile drained from Lynn's face. The playful mood vanished. All right, I'm done teasing you. Time to send you away. He spoke and slowly raised his wand with his right hand, pointing its tip squarely at the last blood puppet trapped in the center of the inferno, the shell that held Linus's consciousness. Crack! Sizzle! Blinding blue-white lightning began to dance at the wand's tip, popping against the air. The light was so searing it ionized the atmosphere, leaving a faint smell of ozone and scorch. For a moment, the glare painted his eyes, turning his pupils into flickering streaks of blue-white. Powerful arcs of electricity spread outward like a physical wave, squeezing down the surrounding flames. This strike was far stronger than those he'd used on the previous puppets. Linus would not wait to be killed. Driven by sheer instinct, he reacted with desperate violence. "You want to kill me? It won't be that easy. We're going down together," he bellowed. The dark red bloodlight that had been maintaining the puppet's dim shield suddenly reversed, surging back into the puppet's body. The alchemical runes on its surface flared a malevolent red, its torso becoming a blood-colored furnace about to burst. Whoosh! A thick red mist of blood erupted from every joint and pore, converging on its clawed palms. Shing! 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 Thousands of blood-colored blades, thin as cicada wings with black energy leeching along their edges, exploded outward from the puppet in all directions with Linus at the center. The blades moved with blinding speed and deceptive trajectories, penetrating the fire barrier and sealing off every escape above, below, left, and right. Wherever those blades passed, they corroded life itself. The residual flames, the charred tufts of grass, even distant bushes that had not yet felt the fire gave odd hissing sounds as their vitality was forcibly drawn out. Plants wilted, turned black, and crumbled into ash. Faint traces of life energy flowed back along the blade's paths, absorbed and transformed into even fouler strands of red light that fed into the puppet, trying to prolong its existence and strengthen the assault. Faced with this all-around, frantic counterattack, Lynn was forced to interrupt the final gathering of his thunder. His brow knotted, and his figure blurred as he moved, dodging a barrage of blades that twisted and shifted with impossible speed. His movements were still fast, but the composure he'd shown before had vanished. He looked unsteady. Several times, the blades missed him by hair's breadth. The hem of his robe was sliced open. One razor edge skimmed so close, it nearly grazed his cheek. Linus laughed, wild and triumphant. "Ha! Pathetic! Run, brat! Where is your thunder now? Your flames? Before absolute power, your tricks are nothing." He drove the puppet to fire more and faster blades, vowing to shred Lynn apart. Then, amid the whistling of slashing air, a clear, cutting sound rang out, the soft, dreadful note of a blade sinking into flesh. One of the blades had found a tiny gap in Lynn's dodge, sliding into his shoulder blade and nearly passing through his torso. Lynn froze midair, the color drained from his face. He lowered his head and stared in disbelief at the blood-colored tip protruding from the front of his shoulder. He met the puppet's hysterical gaze with nothing but hatred. The wound that blade had made turned an unhealthy gray-white, and the pallor spread quickly, crawling over his skin. His muscles began to shrivel, his life force being violently leached by that single blade. "Ugh! Ah!" Lynn groaned. He tried to lift his wand, but his arm sagged uselessly. The raging sea of fire that had bound the puppet seemed to lose its source. Without Lynn's power, the flames collapsed into smoke. In a few breaths, the towering prison was little more than green-tinged wisps, and Lynn dropped helplessly, landing on the charred ground with a heavy thud. The fire vanished, the thunder died, and the immediate threat was gone. Only the central blood puppet remained, cracked and reeling, and the Lynn who lay motionless on the scorched earth. Silence descended, a deathly hush broken only by the night wind over the blackened ground. Linus's laughter burst out again, louder and more exultant than before. "Dead! Finally dead! You cursed brat! This is what you get when you oppose me. Run! Why aren't you running? Your schemes, your tricks, before true power they mean nothing." He guided the puppet forward and walked toward the fallen corpse. Within 3 steps, he leaned down and reached out to touch it. The body on the ground made a faint cracking noise like fine glass breaking. To Linus's horror, it dissolved into countless shimmering white points of light and dispersed into the air. From behind came a dry, cocky voice. "Look at what you're doing." "What?" Linus spun, but it was too late. The real Lynn had already reappeared several meters behind and to the side of the puppet. Not only had the thunder at his wand's tip not dissipated, but the performance he'd just staged had allowed him to condense it even further. Now it exploded outward. Rumble, a bolt of lightning, thicker, whiter, and more furious than any before, erupted from the wand like an enraged thunder dragon. It bore down with majestic, uncompromising force and swallowed the puppet and Linus in an instant. There was no roar, only a searing heat and a surge of annihilating energy. The puppet's shattered body and the consciousness clinging to it were vaporized utterly. Nothing remained. Lynn relaxed a fraction. Solved. He turned his gaze back toward Hogwarts, intending to return. When he looked up, the sight before him made him pause. Hogwarts was encased in a massive shell-like protective shield, hugging the castle like a solid eggshell. Outside the barrier, on a nearby hillside, two figures stood. One of them, a woman, was staring dumbfoundedly at Lynn as he turned his head. 182. Oh, it's me. Professor McGonagall had taught for so many years. She had seen prodigies and astonishing feats of magic, but the thunder and fire intertwined out in the distance a moment ago. Could that really be the combat power of a third-year student? Her experience and her sense of what a pupil could do felt suddenly inadequate, even irrelevant, standing before Lynn. But worry pushed aside her astonishment. No matter how unusual this child was, he'd just been in a dangerous fight. Was he hurt? Had he been tainted by the dark arts? "Minerva," Dumbledore began, but McGonagall was already moving. She reached Lynn in an instant. "Don't move." Her voice left no room for argument. She seized his arm so hard Lynn flinched, and with her other hand she drew her wand and began a rapid, systematic examination from head to toe. "Professor, Lynn tried to protest, to say he was fine. "Silence!" McGonagall cut him off, frowning as she searched for any sign of injury. When she met his eyes, they sharpened. Her voice rose with a fierce edge. This was far too dangerous. "Mr. Lynn, do you have any idea what could have gone wrong if the slightest thing had failed? Stop everything now. I'm taking you to the school infirmary this instant so Poppy can give you a full checkup." Lynn opened his mouth and looked pleadingly at Dumbledore. "Headmaster, please say something." Dumbledore met his gaze, then glanced at McGonagall's determined face. He hesitated a moment and shook his head at Lynn. With a wave of his hand, the massive protective shield that had surrounded Hogwarts receded like a tide, revealing the castle's usual calm outline. The suits of armor that had briefly been on alert seemed to obey the same command, returning to their places and resuming their silence. "Minerva is right to be concerned," Dumbledore said softly. "Lynn, you did extraordinarily well tonight, better than anyone expected. But a post-battle checkup isn't just formality. It's to protect your health and to make sure there's nothing lingering from that encounter. Listen to Professor McGonagall and let Poppy examine you properly. That way, we can all sleep easier." In the castle corridors leading to the infirmary, the usual quiet had vanished. The explosion, the blaze of fire, the sudden appearance and disappearance of the wards, and the temporary curfew had already alerted everyone left on the grounds. As the restrictions lifted, students peeked out from porches and stairwells when they heard footsteps. They watched McGonagall march Lynn along, arm locked in hers, and whispers spread like wildfire. "Look, Lynn! Professor McGonagall's holding him. What did he do? It must be about that explosion and fire out by the grounds. I saw it. Huge flames and lightning. No way he could have." Rumors ballooned, fed by overheard scraps in students' imagination, until a wild story took hold. "Did you hear? Lynn from Hufflepuff tried to set the castle on fire. He even had accomplices. McGonagall activated the wards. They caught him and are taking him to the dungeons. Is he going to be expelled?" Lynn didn't hear the ever more absurd gossip. McGonagall had escorted him to the infirmary entrance and announced, voice clipped and worried, "Poppy, give this child a thorough examination." He faced at least 3 powerful foes alone, used high-intensity offensive spells, and may have been exposed to corruption. Madame Pomfrey immediately put down what she was doing and hurried over. She scanned Lynn from head to toe, nodded to McGonagall, and said, "Leave him with me, Minerva." McGonagall loosened her grip a touch, but still warned Lynn, Cooperate with Madame Pomfrey. You'll stay here tonight. You're not to go anywhere. She told Pomfrey to alert her or Dumbledore at once if anything came up, then gave Lynn a final concerned look and left to attend to post-warding matters. What followed was an exhaustive examination. Madame Pomfrey used no fewer than 10 diagnostic spells: blood work, soul scans, bone and muscle checks, tests for mental fatigue, treating Lynn like a rare specimen. Finally, after a long round of fussing, she replaced her wand and allowed her face to soften. Sitting at her desk and writing notes, she said, based on all the tests, there's no major physical problem. She glanced up. Your mind is rather keyed up, though. That won't help with recovery or rest. She opened a cabinet, took down a bottle, and handed it to Lynn. Drink this tranquility potion. It will calm you, ease your mind, and help you sleep deeply. Stay here under observation tonight. If you're fine in the morning, you can go home. The crystal bottle felt cold in Lynn's hand. For some reason, as he stared at the slightly rippling liquid inside, a jolt of unease ran down his spine. He was about to pull the stopper when Madame Pomfrey, clipboard in hand, had already finished packing and was heading for the door. Without looking back, she called over her shoulder, "Remember to dispose of the bottle after you drink it. Don't leave it in the ward. I really don't know what Snape." Her voice trailed off in the corridor. Lynn popped the stopper. Instantly, a wave of scent hit him. It was like rotten herbs baked in the midsummer sun for days, mixed with swamp silt, a trace of sulfur, and the sour tang of spoiled milk. The stench filled the whole ward. Blah! Lynn was struck by it. His stomach turned, his vision blurred for a moment, his hand trembled, and he nearly threw the bottle away. Damn Snape and his brewing lessons. Wait, it had been his own work. Well, that made it acceptable. With a small flare of fiend fire, Lynn burned the potion and the bottle to nothingness. Not even ash remained. From the next ward came a familiar, outraged voice. Gag! Cough! Cough! Blast it! Why does this blasted tranquility potion still taste like that? Blah! Professor Lupin. Lynn blinked. Why was Lupin in the infirmary? He went next door and pushed the door open. Professor Lupin lay in the bed with bandages wrapped around his limbs and chest, retching and dry heaving between curses. When Lynn pushed open the ward door, the faint creak sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet. On the hospital bed, Lupin was turning his head, reaching for the water glass on the nightstand, but his movements were clumsy and hindered by the restraints. Hearing the door, he turned with effort. His face looked paler and more haggard than usual. Good evening, Professor. Lynn stepped closer and greeted him in a steady voice. Lupin tried to smile, but the moment the corners of his mouth moved, a sickening aftertaste of 20 surged up his throat. Good. Evening, Mr. Lynn. He clapped a hand to his mouth, waited a beat, and then dropped it awkwardly. Lynn's eyes swept over him. Lupin was practically wrapped like a mummy, bandages wound thickly around his chest and arms with faint blood seeping through. His left arm was in a sling, his right leg in a splint, and he was propped against the raised headboard in obvious discomfort. He did not look like someone who could move easily at all. Professor, what happened to you? Lynn sat in the chair by the bed, concern and curiosity in his tone. He wondered once again whether the defense against the dark arts post was cursed. Lupin had been teaching less than half a year and had already been seriously injured twice. Lupin's expression tightened. He shifted his bandage-wrapped body, tugging at his wounds. The corners of his mouth twitched in pain. It's nothing serious. While patrolling near the Forbidden Forest, I ran into some trouble and was scratched by a 11. Madame Pomfrey has treated it. It looks bad, but it's only superficial. I'll be fine soon. Lynn stared at Lupin, half swaddled, struggling to speak, and at his attempt to keep calm. He was silent for 2 or 3 seconds. Professor, has anyone ever told you you really can't keep your mouth shut? Lupin went silent, his bloodless face flushing faintly, probably from irritation. He opened his mouth to retort, but the facts were in front of him. Any excuse would sound weak. He settled on a tactic often used by 16s when dealing with blunt students. Change the subject and take control. Clearing his throat, he tried to restore an authoritative tone. Ahem, let's not dwell on that. Lynn, why are you in the school infirmary? Are you feeling unwell? Lynn blinked. Oh, I'm fine. I blew up 3 puppets and got a bit overexcited, so Madame Pomfrey made me stay overnight for observation. Blew up 3 puppets? Lupin repeated, incredulous. A picture formed in his mind that made his face go ashen. It was you? Tonight, outside the 18, you destroyed all those blood puppets sent by Lennis? There was another thought he didn't say aloud. That was far beyond just being an outstanding student by Dumbledore's standards. Lynn didn't react to Lupin's shock. A different detail had caught his attention. The name Lupin had blurted out. Lennis? He asked, cocking his head and firing 3 questions at once. Who? He made and controlled those puppets? You know him, Professor? Lupin realized he'd slipped. His expression shifted. He avoided Lynn's eyes and turned toward the window, adopting a tight, non-responsive posture. The room chilled for a moment. Then Lynn spoke quietly, in a teasing tone that made his philtrum itch. Professor, you wouldn't want your identity as a 17 known to the rest of the students, would you? Lupin's back stiffened. He felt threatened. He took a slow breath and looked back. Lennis, he wasn't always as 11. At least not like the monster he is now. That's it. Lynn raised an eyebrow, clearly dissatisfied with such a short answer. Young man, have some patience. Lupin adjusted his breathing. That was many years ago. An accident. I was fighting a rogue 11. The battle was fierce. We fought from the woods into an abandoned manor that happened to be Lennis's home at the time. He was then a 19, obsessed with 12, and living in seclusion. Lennis and I teamed up to defeat that 11, but in the end, in the chaos, Lennis was bitten while trying to stop the 11's dying counterattack, a very deep wound. He was infected immediately. His voice dropped, thick with self-reproach. Because of that accident, we became acquaintances. In a way, we were fellow sufferers. We both wanted to escape this damn fate and be ordinary 19s again. Lupin went on. We traveled everywhere together, searching ancient texts, exploring ruins, tracking down rumored healers and hermits, looking for a cure, or at least some relief. Eventually, we went to Egypt and entered an ancient site known as the Blood Sand Corridor. That place was sinister. Inside, we found a scroll written in ancient runes. He paused, recalling the scene. It was strange. When I tried to read it, there were only writhing shadows on the page. I couldn't make sense of it. It made me dizzy. But Lennis understood it. He said the scroll described a method for a 11 to completely escape the bloodlust curse and even acquire a superior perfect body. The text said he needed to collect the blood of every magical creature as the primal fluid, combine it with ancient 12 and dark arts to forge a perfect body, then transplant his consciousness into it. He believed that would cure him and let him transcend the limits of a 19. Lynn's eyes flashed. That line of thought fit the pattern of dark wizards and rogue alchemists. And then, he pressed. In that place we argued, fiercely. I couldn't accept a method that required sacrificing countless lives. I thought the scroll itself was corrupting people, tempting them to fall. Lennis wouldn't listen. He was captivated by that hope. The fight triggered the site's unstable ancient 23. The Blood Sand Corridor began to collapse. Sandstorms, traps, and curses all activated. In the chaos, I used an explosion charm to blast myself out through the closing entrance. When I woke up, I was in the desert outside. Lennis, he didn't make it out. I thought he was dead, Lupin murmured, his voice almost a whisper, until tonight. 184, the old saying. The winter chill had quietly receded. Snow around Hogwarts melted into trickling streams, feeding the first buds, pushing up through the earth. Time moved on, and a long spell of calm had passed since the puppet attack. In the Great Hall, a formal commendation ceremony was underway. Teachers and students gathered, eyes fixed on the staff table. In recognition of Lynn's extraordinary courage, calm judgment, and exceptional skill in self-preservation and crisis management during a recent illegal intrusion at the school, which prevented the situation from worsening and protected the safety of our faculty and students, the Board of Governors has approved awarding Lynn the Special Contribution to the School Award, together with a prize of 1,000 galleons. Warm applause rose from the hall. Beside the Hufflepuff table, Edgar, William, and Ollie clapped loudly, sharing his honor. Lynn stepped forward and received a heavy velvet bag of galleons from Dumbledore, along with a finely crafted gold medal engraved with the Hogwarts crest and the words "Special Contribution." He smiled politely, but inwardly sighed. What he had actually wanted was not gold, but a few of the old-looking tomes from Dumbledore's private shelf. When he had hinted as much, Dumbledore had declined as gently as he could. "The knowledge in those notes is ancient and leans toward darkness," Dumbledore had said. "It is not suitable for a young wizard whose mind is still growing. Curiosity is the source of wisdom, but sometimes it needs the guidance of a riverbank. Perhaps when you are older and have a more stable framework for understanding magic and the world, we can revisit this." Kind and reasonable, perfectly impeccable. Lynn couldn't help thinking, though, that it felt exactly like an older relative saying, "I'll save this money for you until you're grown," while smiling and taking away your New Year's envelope. Peaceful student life at Hogwarts turned out not to be entirely without its waves. Those waves mostly centered on our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Remus Lupin. Since being seriously injured and hospitalized by menace, Professor Lupin had been in and out of the school infirmary 3 times. Yes, 3. The first 2 were well known. The third was dramatic. It had happened on the night of the full moon last month. That night, Professor Snape, as usual, handed out the month's potion. Professor Lupin, as usual, drank it. But whether Snape had tinkered with the formula or an accident had occurred during brewing, the taste and scent of that potion reached a truly vicious peak. According to Lupin, he took 1 sip and his face changed. Before he could even manage to vomit, the indescribable scent knocked him out cold. His eyes rolled back, and he fainted on the spot. The next morning, during Defense Against the Dark Arts, the students waited and waited, but the instructor never appeared. Lupin failing to show up was extremely rare. News that Professor Lupin is absent without reason spread through the castle like wildfire. Speculation ran rampant, and then an inside scoop leaked from a Hufflepuff student named Lynn who wished to remain anonymous, and from a certain pair of red-haired twins keen on enriching campus culture. Professor Lupin had not merely fallen ill, he had suffered a backlash from the legendary curse of the defense class. His condition was critical. He might even be about to die. By the time it reached most ears, the rumor had hardened into, "Professor Lupin is cursed, hanging by a thread. Madame Pomfrey is at her wit's end, and Headmaster Dumbledore is doing his best, but hope is slim." A somber mood settled over the school. Although Lupin hadn't taught long, his gentle nature and practical methods had endeared him to many. Tearful students swarmed Deputy Headmistress McGonagall, demanding to see Professor Lupin one last time, or at least to let him know they cared. McGonagall, bewildered by the sudden requests for end-of-life visits, calmed the students, declared that Lupin was merely unwell and in no danger of dying, and set about tracing the rumor's source. Following the trail, she soon found Lynn by the Black Lake and asked him sternly if he had been spreading false rumors about Lupin. Lynn was baffled. Rumors? About Professor Lupin? What curse? What last time? He thought back to a corridor encounter with the Weasley twins a few days earlier. They had joked, offhand, as they always did, about whether Snape's potion potency had been upgraded again, and whether Lupin's fainting might be connected to the defense class rumors. Lynn had laughed and made a casual remark about the refreshing, brain-awakening effects of Snape's brew. He never expected the twins' gossiping skills and the students' imaginations to be such a perfect match. "Slander, Professor, this is absolute slander. I was just chatting casually with George and Fred, making a joke about, the invigorating effects of Snape's potion. How could I have started such a rumor? This is a misunderstanding. The rumor mutated terribly as it spread. I swear on my family's name." McGonagall gave a stern warning that there won't be a next time, and docked 20 points from Hufflepuff for spreading false information and causing unnecessary panic. The matter calmed down. Lupin regained consciousness a day after fainting. Aside from some lingering qualms about the potion's aroma, he was fine and soon returned to class to put the rumors to rest. Lynn once again experienced the peculiar craftsmanship of rumor-making at Hogwarts. Time moved on. One early morning, with the sky neither dark nor bright and a pale light on the eastern horizon, Hogwarts still slept. Lynn rose early as usual, slipped through silent corridors, and climbed the spiral stair to the roof of an abandoned West Tower. The view there was broad and undisturbed. It had become his regular training spot. He took out his wand and lightly pressed its tip to his chest. Eyes closed, mind focused, he recited the incantation he had long since learned by heart. Amato, animato, animagus. Thump, thump. A strong second heartbeat pulsed in his chest, overlapping with his own. He had felt this countless times. Each occurrence meant he was at the most critical stage of preparing to become an animagus. The final step remained. Lynn lowered his wand and sighed. This blasted weather. He had followed the process to the letter and buried the moonlight potion in the ground, waiting for a violent thunderstorm to strike. But during winter, the highlands had only snowed, no proper rain, much less thunder. Spring had finally arrived and the weather had become livelier, but the storms were either thunder without rain or light drizzle, never the real thunderstorm he needed. To borrow a crude saying from his past life, the situation was properly screwed. Lynn thought the description fit. If it really didn't work out, he'd have to resort to some special measures. 185. Waste of materials. The alchemy workshop inside the Nine was supposed to be a sacred place where machinery and scene resonated in harmony. Right now it smelled of burned metal, gunpowder sulfur, and scorched fumes. The usually tidy floor was littered with warped metal parts, charred fragments, and cooled slag. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The sound of welding never stopped as a torch spat a blue flame, fusing two pieces of special steel with precise arcs. Lynn wore protective goggles, his expression tense, sweat running down his temples. He was attempting a simple task: build a cannon that conformed to scientific principles. In theory, it should be straightforward. In practice, it was a disaster. Boom! Another explosion. The experimental barrel bulged and split, a hot blast of air and shrapnel spitting out amid flashes of fire. Luckily, Lynn had set a powerful protective 17 array in advance, containing most of the blast to the workbench, but the scorching fragments and dense smoke left a blackened mess. The shield flickered and absorbed the worst of it. When the dust settled, he withdrew the shield and stared at the ruined barrel. He was silent a few seconds, then let out a frustrated laugh. Ha! He wiped his face. The soot on his hands only made him look worse. Unbelievable. I've brewed complex potions and deciphered ancient alchemical cores. How can building a cannon based on basic principles be this difficult? This was his 7th attempt. Every time the barrel failed. He wasn't a professional engineer. Engrave had given him principles and macrostructure, not the fine craft details of modern cannon manufacture. The thing required extreme precision and material integrity. Any tiny uneven stress or defect would be magnified under the high temperature and pressure of firing. "Doo-doo?" Lynn called crossly. Pop! With a crisp crack, the house elf Doo-doo appeared at his side, wearing a specially made protective apron and even a sem-recording pen tucked behind one ear. It glanced at the wreckage and its master's soot-smeared face, its pointed nose twitching. "Master, Doo-doo is here," it said in its high, respectful voice. "Bring me another batch of special steel." Lynn stared at the pile of scrap, unwilling to give up. Doo-doo hesitated 2 beats, then snapped its fingers. Bang! Clatter. The elf produced a dense pile of steel that landed with a heavy thud, its metallic sheen cold under the lamp. It didn't leave at once. Instead, it looked up at Lynn, gaze shifting between the smudged face and the new steel, and finally sighed. "Master, Doo-doo truly recognizes your alchemy. The items you make are valuable, but—" It paused. "Your scientific skills are limited." Lynn fell silent. He felt a prick of shame, then anger. How was he supposed to know building a cannon would be such a nightmare? If that blasted animagus requirement hadn't insisted on naturally occurring storm weather, he would have called up a thunderstorm with a weather charm ages ago. Why struggle with steel and explosives when he could have forced the weather? Seeing his master's expression, Doo-doo sighed again. If only there were a ready-made cannon, Master wouldn't be wasting steel every day. Ready-made? Those words struck Lynn like a bolt. He looked up. There had to be artificial rainfall and storm technology in 1904, surely. Maybe the British Meteorological Office could help. He slapped his thigh. "Doo-doo." The house elf snapped to attention. "Master?" "We're going out," Lynn said. He fished through his memory for a place name he'd read once. Bracknell, Berkshire. He remembered reading that Bracknell housed an important office and research center for the Met Office. He wasn't sure of the address, but a wizard could find it once they arrived. Dudu, who didn't understand why its master had suddenly pivoted from cannons to a muggle town, obeyed promptly. "Yes, master!" It grabbed the hem of Lynn's robe. Crack! Space folded with a pop. In an instant, the two vanished from the 9. Seconds later, they arrived in Bracknell, Berkshire. Lynn sent Dudu back to the 9. A house elf was too conspicuous among muggles. A cold wind lifted as he surveyed the town. Unlike London, Bracknell had no skyscrapers. Low buildings, green spaces, and office parks, research and administrative in appearance. He spotted a fairly large, modern office park laid out in regular blocks. That had to be the Met Office complex. He changed into clothes that made him look like a young man from a well-off family and walked in. Thanks to his attire, he entered the park without question and strolled among the buildings, scanning door signs and directories for anything that said Director's Office. As he passed one office door, it opened from the inside. A middle-aged man in a sensible suit emerged, clutching a folder, the kind of person who managed people rather than papers. He stopped when he saw Lynn, an odd sight, a young person alone in an office area at this hour. He squinted, trying to place him. "Excuse me," the man said, stepping closer, voice businesslike. "Who are you? Whose child are you?" Trouble. Lynn's 19 had already slid into his hand from his sleeve. He considered a quick, clean obliviate, but another idea struck. This man clearly looked managerial. He would know where the director's office was. In a heartbeat, Lynn changed tack. He stopped, and under the man's scrutinizing gaze, turned with a slightly apologetic smile. Confundo. The confundist charm hit the man between the brows. He swayed, eyes wobbling with sudden confusion, then refocused. When he looked at Lynn again, the doubt was gone, replaced with a warm, familiar recognition. "Oh," the man patted his forehead, smiling. "Of course, it's you, young man. I haven't seen you in years. You've grown so much, I nearly didn't recognize you. Are you here to see the director?" His tone was natural, as if Lynn were the child of an old acquaintance. The charm worked perfectly. Lynn nodded. "Good afternoon. Yes, my family asked me to find the director." "He's just up ahead," the man said, pointing and lowering his voice. "Around this corner, the third door on the right with the director's office sign. He should be in this afternoon, but hurry, he's got a meeting later." "Thank you, sir." Lynn sounded sincere. "You've been very helpful." The man laughed and waved him on, humming to himself as he walked away with his folder, utterly unaware of anything amiss. Following the directions, Lynn found the office and knocked. 3 measured raps, neither too hard nor too soft. Thud! 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 The sound echoed down the quiet corridor. "Come in!" "Ha ha! Ha ha!" Lynn gripped the handle and pushed. With a click and the soft give of a lock, he slipped into the director's office and closed the door behind him. The director looked up from a report and froze when he saw a teenager with unmistakable East Asian features standing there. His eyebrows rose in a puzzled, assessing frown. Who was this young man? The son of some subordinate who had wandered in by mistake? A visitor from a partner organization? The secretary hadn't mentioned anyone. "Young man, may I ask, which of our staff are your parents? Is there something you need?" he asked, his eyes lingering on Lynn's casual clothing as if sizing up his background. "Sorry, sir. You wouldn't know even if I told you," Lynn answered coolly. The director's displeasure deepened. "Young man, this is not a place where you can just—" He didn't finish. Lynn moved before the sentence was out. He didn't bother with words. His motion was so fast it left only an afterimage. "Stupefy!" The director's eyes widened and then went blank. He slumped back into the leather chair, body slack, sinking into a deep coma. Silence returned to the office, broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock. Lynn stepped around the desk and knelt at the director's side. He raised his levin and tapped the man's temple once. Legilimency. Images, sounds, texts, and numbers flooded Lynn's mind like a tidal wave. He filtered out the mundane, snatches of family life, calendar reminders, petty office notes, and focused on anything mentioning artificial weather modification, catalytic equipment, and special inventory. Fragments flashed, complex weather model blueprints, conference table discussions about aid for drought-stricken regions. A folder stamped top secret, an old file codenamed Project Skylark, call logs with military numbers, references to a heavily guarded site on the southern coast that kept reappearing. Lynn's consciousness worked like a precision processor, sifting and indexing. He found the core. There was indeed an existing artificial rainfall system, special shells and launchers for high-altitude dispersal. And the storage location, Gosport Defense Munitions Base. He rubbed his temple and let out a short, incredulous laugh. Meteorological equipment stored in a munitions depot, whose idea was that? If anything, he figured, the dispersal devices were modified shells and launchers and had been consigned to military storage because of the similar safety standards. With the exact location secured, he erased the recent minutes from the director's mind. Using 11, he wiped the memory from the moment he'd knocked until the present. The director would only remember a sudden doze or a brief lapse. Then Lynn walked out of the meteorological bureau the same way he'd come in and left the campus. Outside, in a quiet, deserted alley, he stopped and looked up. He estimated direction and distance, bent his legs, and kicked off the ground. The pavement trembled as he launched into the sky. Wind shrieked past his ears, but he wrapped it in a barrier with a practiced hand. Towns, roads, and fields shrank beneath him into fast-moving models. 5 minutes later, the southern English coastline came into view. He slowed and dropped altitude, matching the coordinates he'd pulled from the director's memories to the outline of a sprawling complex below. The Gosport Defense Munitions Base. Even from above, its scale was obvious. High walls topped with barbed wire, watchtowers, neat rows of warehouse blocks, crisscrossing service roads, and the occasional patrol vehicle. Lynn hovered and strengthened a disillusionment charm until he was effectively part of the sky. Comparing the memory's vague notes, he locked onto a northern sector where warehouse numbers carried special prefixes, where non-standard, experimental, or special-purpose munitions would be kept. He began a silent descent toward Special Warehouse Number 3. The base was mostly still. Only the distant hum of engines and the wind soughing through wire broke the quiet. Special Warehouse Num. 3 was a squat, reinforced concrete building, painted military gray-green. Its heavy doors were shut. A small squad of soldiers, rifles slung and wearing live rounds, stood at the entrance. Lynn landed in the shadow at the warehouse's side, nearly melding with the wall. He watched the soldiers and prepared the simplest plan, a powerful muggle-repelling charm to send them away. He raised his 11, aimed at the guards, and breathed the incantation. An instant later, an icy needle of dread stabbed up his spine. His pupils pinched down. Without time to think where it came from, he halted the spell mid-phrase, coiled his legs, and rocketed upward. Wah! A wild, mad laughter erupted from the shadows on the far side of the warehouse and scattered across the base, harsh and eerie. The soldiers snapped their heads toward the sound. Enemy attack? Who's there? Alert! Sound the alarm! Rifle fire cracked. Da-da-da-da-da-da! Muzzle flashes flickering in the dim by the building's side. But the shooting was brief, absurdly brief, a single sudden burst that stopped as quickly as it had started. Voices screamed, then choked off into muffled groans. The whole sequence, from the crazed laughter to the burst of gunfire to the silence, took no more than 2 or 3 seconds. By the time anyone could register what had happened, the soldiers at the door lay motionless in pools of blood. Their firearms and ammunition were gone, vanished without a trace. 187. Blood Sand Corridor, 2-in-1. Lynn glanced around and saw the soldiers drop their guns, an unmistakable sign that something was wrong. Hovering in midair, he waved his wand and cast a powerful muggle-repelling charm over the warehouse and its surroundings. Invisible ripples spread out, enclosing the building and the area within 1,000 meters. When the charm was in place, he dropped his altitude and landed in front of the warehouse's explosion-proof metal door. Alohomora, he said. A white light flared at the tip of his wand. He tapped it once against the center of the door. A low metallic vibration ran through the structure, followed by the hiss of released air pressure. The heavy door, normally requiring multiple verifications to open, slid aside smoothly. Lynn stepped in without hesitation and flicked his wand behind him. The door closed silently. Inside was an enormous warehouse with a surprisingly high ceiling. Rows of metal shelving stretched deep into the darkness. The shelves that should have been stocked with special ammunition or meteorological equipment were empty. Only a few cargo straps hung forlornly, with dust and scraps of packaging scattered on the floor, clearly looted very recently. "Am I too late?" Lynn murmured as he hurried inward. Near the center of the warehouse, he passed a section of particularly thick shelving that looked built for large devices or launchers. Crack! The unmistakable sound of apparition echoed from the shadows beyond the shelves. Lynn reacted instantly and darted toward the noise. He rounded a massive rack to see the last ripples of spatial distortion fading in the air. At the center of those ripples, a blurred dark figure had just finished vanishing. "Damn it!" he swore. Rage flared. "Someone stole my prize after all the trouble I went to? Want to run? Not if I have anything to say about it. Wu-an, after them!" A clear, melodious cry like a phoenix's call echoed through the warehouse. A brilliant golden red light burst from Lynn. Wu-an, the phoenix, flashed into being on his shoulder. Its eyes gleamed with golden fire as it flapped, then the light contracted and the pair vanished. The sensation of spatial transition lasted only a moment. When Lynn rematerialized, the simultaneous alarms from Peter's jolt and Wu-an hit him. "Master, below!" Wu-an warned. Lynn twisted and dashed to the side reflexively. Below him, someone had wheeled around. A metal tube etched with alchemical runes perched on their shoulder and aimed straight at them. "Take this!" A blazing ball of light erupted from the muzzle, carrying a scorching heat and the stench of sulfur directly at Lynn, fast, almost unavoidable. Lynn snorted, not panicking. The golden feathers of Wuan's wings rippled with spatial waves. The projectile struck the ripple like a trampoline and bounced back along its incoming path, slamming into another launcher that had just been brought out. The resulting sympathetic explosion swallowed the attacker. Rubble rained through the narrow space. When the smoke and dust thinned, nothing remained of the shooter but a scorched scorch and scattered flesh and metal, unrecognizable. Nearby lay a cloth bag, miraculously intact, with several similar metal tubes and a glinting piece of metal rolling out. Lynn looked at the ruined corpse without pity and strode to the bag. "The items aren't here," he muttered, and rifled through the other contents. He picked up a crude rocket launcher, flicked a trace of magical energy into it, and fired. A dark red beam carved a small crater in the distant stone wall. Lynn sneered. "Not even as good as one of my explosion charms." He tossed it back into the bag. Then he picked up the shimmering piece of metal. Runes were engraved on it in goblin script. Lynn, fluent in many tongues, read the words, "Long live goblins." "Long live goblins," he mused. "Is this goblin territory, or some kind of key for a goblin storeroom?" He surveyed the place more carefully. Beneath his boots lay thick yellow sand. The walls and what passed for a ceiling were built of huge bricks fired from sandy soil, their joints sealed with a black substance that gave the whole structure an ancient, crude look. The air was dry and dusty and smelled faintly of age. Despite the rough construction, it was sturdily built. The earlier explosion hadn't buckled the main structure. "Wuan," Lynn said quietly, "where exactly are we?" Wuan closed its eyes, and a soft golden-red glow rippled around its body. A few seconds later, it opened its eyes. "Master, we are currently in an independent space. The external anchor for this space should be located deep beneath the base of a quadrangular pyramidal building. The entrance is protected by powerful concealment charms and physical mechanisms." "A pyramid? Beneath the base?" Lynn's lip twitched. "Did we leave the country again? Egypt? Or is there a pyramid somewhere else?" "Master, there's a strong spatial disturbance at the other edge of this space. Someone is trying to apparote away." Wuan added, the light in its eyes intensifying. "I have interfered with and locked the spatial stability there. They can't complete the apparition right now and are stuck, though I can't hold it long. This space itself is resisting my lockdown." "Good work, Wuan." Lynn's spirits lifted. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Bring me there. I want to see who's pulling the strings and where they hid my goods." With a sharp cry from Wuan and a flare of light, they vanished from the sandy chamber and reappeared at the edge of an ancient brick room where the spatial structure shimmered. The ripples of failed apparition still hung in the air. At their center, 3 scrawny figures were awkwardly frozen in mid-transition. 3 goblins, stuck in the last ridiculous poses of their attempted escape, legs and arms flailing. Wuan's confinement held them like a spiderweb. They couldn't move forward or backward, only wriggle helplessly in place. Lynn took his time watching the trapped thieves. "You all stuck? Practiced that pose long?" The goblins struggled harder when they saw him. Lynn did not give them time. He flicked his wand against his hand. A few ordinary metal rings clamped around its shaft fell off with bright little chimes. As they dropped, they expanded and transformed from finger-sized rings into several metal collars, gleaming cold and hard, exactly the kind he had confiscated during the Valentine Troop incident last year. After studying and improving them with alchemy and dark arts contracts, he had created a batch of portable master-servant contract collars, version 2.0, stronger, more constraining, and superbly disguised. Normally, they were hidden as decorative rings locked onto his wand. "No, please, Mr. Wizard," the largest goblin wailed. Begging was the only sensible move against a wizard. "Let us go. We were only following orders. We'll give you everything," another cried. "You can't do this." "The goblin race." The third tried to threaten, but its voice trembled. Lynn ignored them. He flicked his wand. The metal collars shot out like cold comets and snapped precisely onto the goblins' necks. Their frantic hands couldn't stop them. There was a soft hiss as barbed probes and runes inside each collar extended and plunged into the goblin's skin, stabbing near the carotids and along the upper spine. Blood welled immediately. The goblins shrieked, their bodies convulsed. Then the dull gems set in the collars flared to life, a red pulse, and the devices were activated. Just to be sure, Lynn tested one. He muttered a single incantation, "Cruciatus." Although no dazzling spellwork burst from his wand, searing agony flooded the designated goblin through the collar's link, a torment that clawed at the soul. The creature arched and screamed, eyes bulging, mouth open in a terrible, soundless wail. Its limbs thrashed in impossible jerks. The other two, not directly cursed, curled up and trembled, too terrified to even look at Lynn. When he released the curse, the tortured goblin collapsed like a heap of mud, chest heaving, but eyes dimmed to utter submission. "Good. It's functioning normally," Lynn said, satisfied. "Lift the lockdown, Wuan," he told the phoenix. "They're on our side now." Wuan gave a soft cry and beat its wings. The spatial confinement dissolved. The goblins felt the stuck sensation drain away, but none dared to move. After what they had just experienced, who knew what else those collars could do? Survival meant obedience. The largest goblin forced itself up, feigning fawning and terrified respect. With trembling hands, it untied a small, ordinary cloth bag from its waist, held it aloft, and offered it to Lynn. Master, these are the things we took from the Muggle warehouse. They're all in this undetectable extension pouch. Please look." Lynn took the palm-sized bag. It was surprisingly heavy. He fed a sliver of magic into it to scan the interior. Even so, he still raised an eyebrow. The pocket's internal space was enormous, a small armory poured out inside. Heavy machine guns, compact mortars and ammo boxes, various rocket launchers and anti-tank weapons, even several military off-road vehicles worth of fuel and spare parts, basically every medium and light infantry weapon you could imagine. Most importantly were his targets. Several modified cannons with precision dials and potion injection ports, dozens of special shells marked with chemical symbols, and the Meteorological Bureau's cloud map logo, the specialized devices for artificial rainfall and enhancement from the director's memories. "A good haul," Lynn observed, casually hanging the small bag at his waist. He turned back to the three trembling goblins, voice hardening. "Now answer my questions. First, what is this place? Second, why did you goblins raid a Muggle military base and then hide down here?" The largest goblin immediately prostrated itself and babbled the answers. "Reporting to Master. This is a ruin called the Blood Sand Corridor. It's a treasure vault and sacrificial site built by a powerful ancient desert goblin lord. We used secret passages passed down by our ancestors and paid a huge price to reopen the entrance. We came here to..." It faltered under Lynn's stare, then forced the rest out. "To perform a resurrection ritual to awaken an ancient goblin high priest sleeping here. He holds lost power and knowledge and can lead the goblin race back to..." "Blood Sand Corridor?" Lynn's heart thudded. It really was the place. He cut the goblin off. "Have you found any ancient runic scrolls or records down here?" "A scroll?" The goblin leader shook its head. Master, we haven't been here long and haven't searched deep. Many areas are. Before it could finish, something changed. Dark little flames burst from the chests of all three goblins at once. The fire raced inward and outward, consuming them from the inside. Arr! No! A backlash! One screamed. I don't want to die! They had time for only a few screams before the flames consumed their bodies and the collars at terrifying speed, leaving no ash, no trace of their existence, only three rapidly dissipating tongues of flame. At the same instant, a chill, murderous intent locked onto Lynn. His expression hardened. 188. Spell it out. Wuan, this place isn't safe. Let's go. Lynn made the split-second decision and hissed the order. Sizzle. Crackle. At the command, Wuan beat his wings. The gold-red light of the star vortex fire surged, about to enshroud Lynn, when it flickered violently like radio waves under heavy interference and emitted a high, piercing whine. The spatial tunnel that should have opened smoothly devolved into chaos, tangled like yarn gripped by countless invisible hands. Master, I can't! Wuan's voice, unusually urgent, rang in Lynn's mind. The spatial structure of this secret realm has been violently disturbed by some kind of 12. Forcing a transfer is extremely risky. We might be hurled into an unknown rift. I need a moment to stabilize it before we can leave safely. Lynn's heart dropped. As fast as possible, he ordered, concise. He already had the 14 clenched in his hand. The chill from the Peter's jolt hadn't diminished. He swept his gaze over the empty, ancient brick chamber like a searchlight. The cloying sensation of being watched from every shadow made his skin crawl, as if countless eyes evaluated them from the dark. Rumble. Without warning, an incredible earthquake struck. The scene shifted abruptly. The yellow sand underfoot boiled and churned. The brick walls groaned and split, and dirt and sand rained from the dome. Then came a sharp, ear-splitting whistle of tearing air. Lynn snapped his head up. The area where the rock dome had been was replaced by a thick, writhing sea of blood. At the center of that ocean, a massive bloody fist, large enough to fill his entire field of vision and radiating a tyrannical aura of destruction, smashed toward where he and Wuan stood like a falling meteor. Before the fist even struck, its wind pressure gouged a huge crater into the sand. Lynn's breath caught as his robe snapped tight against him. Bang! The deafening impact made the whole blood-sand corridor shudder. The bloody fist slammed exactly where Lynn had been standing a heartbeat before. From the point of impact, a peerlessly violent shockwave expanded spherically. Sand brick walls that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled like brittle cookies beneath the crushing force, turning instantly into the finest dust. Everywhere the blast passed, everything was leveled and pulverized. Boom, boom, boom. Aftershocks reverberated through the confined space, spawning a series of dull, thunderous secondary explosions. Dust and blood-tainted sand, mixed with lingering 12, rose into ominous, towering red mushroom clouds that swallowed the sky. The massive, bloody fist slowly dissipated, reverting into streaming blood energy that swirled upward. As the dust and mist settled, a terrifying crater dozens of meters across and several meters deep lay exposed. The sand and stones at its bottom and rim were glassy, as if melted by intense heat and pressure and then rapidly cooled. The blood energy flowed upward, converging at the heights. There, shrouded in blood mist, a monstrous thing hung in midair, flapping a pair of enormous wings. Its head was grotesquely goblin-like, eyes burning with greedy blood-red flame. Long, sharp vampire fangs dripped corrosive saliva. Its body was a patchwork of coarse fur, scales, and bulging muscles, part werewolf torso, part troll limbs with thick clubbed ends tipped in pitch-black claws. Dragon-like wings bristled with bone spurs and tattered membranes, each flap sending out a foul, bloody wind. It was a forced fusion of many magical creatures, a stitched monster. Pah! A sound of contemptuous spitting came from the edge of the crater where the dust had not yet completely settled. Gold-red light dispersed some of the blood mist, and Lynn stepped out, revealing himself. He was not the same as before. From his back unfurled a pair of brilliant, seemingly solid wings, woven from gold-red flame and flowing light, their edges glittering like trapped starlight. Each faint beat scattered warm, hallowed light dust. The wings looked incongruously holy in the hellish scene. Between his brows, a fiery red mark like a phoenix feather had appeared. His pupils had become sharp vertical slits of gold red, his gaze cold and piercing. His body was sheathed in a constantly flowing gold-red water. Its surface rippled like liquid metal. Soft in appearance, it repelled dust utterly, leaving him unstained. "Master," Wuan's voice pulsed directly in Lin's head, urgent. "This isn't the place we started in. I can't hold on long. We must finish this fast." Lin inclined his head once, acknowledging. His gold-red slitted eyes fixed on the floating four that gave off a nauseating aura. His voice echoed in the blood-stained air. "Are you the one they called? The goblin priest they need to resurrect?" The stitched monster peered down at the little thing that had survived its full-strength strike and had transformed. For the first time, some semblance of expression twisted its goblin head, a hideous longing. "A new, magical creature," it rasped. "Such pure, potent vitality. Perfect, so perfect. You are far more suitable as the supreme sacrifice for my return than those inferior alchemical creations and mortal blood." Before the last word left it, the monster's blood-red eyes flared. Its troll arm rose, blood energy converged frantically, and its dragon wings beat with unexpected speed. Carrying a bloody gust and oppressive pressure, it lunged down toward Lin. The wings on Lin's back were not for show. At his thought, the flames and starlight woven through them drew inward, concentrating immense light and heat into a single point. Then, bang! A terrifying sonic boom shattered the air as he broke the sound barrier, the extreme speed pushing the air aside. A visible, milky white ring of displaced air surged outward from Lin's original position, scattering unsettled dust and the remnants of red mushroom clouds. Lin's figure had already vanished from the crater like a struck bolt of gold-red lightning. In the moment of the boom, he rematerialized directly above the massive creature. Time seemed to stall. Suspended midair, expression hard as flint, Lin faced the monster's lifting head and raised his arm, still sheathed in the gold-red water. He spread his fingers, palm down. A clear, majestic phoenix cry pierced the space from his palm. "Screech! Crackle!" Dazzling gold-white electric snakes flickered between his fingers. From beneath the skin of his palm, an even fiercer gold-red flame flared up and braided with the lightning. The thunder's raw violence was tempered by the fire's will. In the small sphere above his hand, the energies condensed into a fist-sized gold-red lightning orb. Within it, countless tiny phoenix phantoms circled and wailed in the light, while razor sparks tore at the edges of reality. Lin's pressing palm pushed forward. Go. 189. Art. Silence condensed, becoming the single point of focus for heaven and earth. The next instant, boom! Everything in sight faded to black and white, then was swallowed by an unbearable golden-red light. Only the brand of that lightning pillar cut across the world like a spear. The patchwork monster's head snapped back, its huge maw full of jagged teeth opened as if to vomit filth. A spray of blood burst from its throat in a choking rush, smelling of rot and rust. The blood mist did not dissipate. It spun and compressed, rapidly forming a massive, thick blood shield in front of it. The barrier spread, trying to enclose the monster's distorted, stitched-together body. "It's a bit more solid than Lennis's blood puppet's shields," Lin remarked. But such an improvement was meaningless against a power undergoing a qualitative change. The lightning pillar struck the blood shield. There was no thunderous clash, no balance of forces, just the cleanest of cuts. Like a razor through rotten paper or harsh sunlight through murky ice, the center of the shield was pierced with a soft sizzle. The edges didn't even collapse. They were vaporized by the thunder and fire that followed, leaving a circular hole that breathed green smoke. The light poured through as if nothing stopped it, ignored the monster's last-ditch motions to turn its head, and slammed into its skull. Boom! The creature howled in disbelief. Lin's strike didn't merely pierce the skull, it swept inward and ripped through the horrific patchwork from the inside. Troll flesh, werewolf fur, dragon scale, goblin bone, every element that made up that grotesque mass lost all meaning. Decomposition, carbonization, ionization, reduced to particles. In less than 2.5 seconds, the gigantic body disintegrated from the head down, along the trunk, limbs, and wings, collapsing into drifting black dust. With a single blow, it was ash. But at the very spot where the shape had dissolved, the sandy ground below began to shudder as though countless springs had erupted. Blood, thicker, fouler, seeped crazily from every crack. In moments, a bubbling, churning pool over 10 meters across gaped beneath Lynn. It was bottomless. From the pool, the blood rose and took on form as if it had a will of its own. Bones, muscle, skin, scales, wings. The form that had just been vaporized recondensed visibly above the blood. Within breaths, a patchwork monster, almost identical to the one before, stood again. Its blood-red eyes fixed on Lynn with the arrogance of the unbeaten. "Human, do you see? In this place I am immortal. Give up your futile resistance, offer me your flesh and soul, and become my perfect sacrifice. It will be your honor." Before the final word left its mouth, the ground centered on the blood pool cracked and collapsed for hundreds of meters. Giant fissures radiated like a spiderweb, and what gushed up from beneath was no longer yellow sand, but endless blood. In an instant, a boundless blood sea replaced the sandy floor of the secret realm. White bones floated on its surface, and the air reeked of bloodlust and despair. The patchwork monster made no hesitation. It sank back into the blood, leaving only its head and part of its torso to float and merge with the pool. "In this sea of immortal blood I draw on 1,000 years of life and hatred. I am invincible." Its voice came from every bubble in the pool, echoing and deafening. "Your strength will run dry, but I endure eternally. Become a part of me willingly." The blood rose like a tsunami, spreading rapidly outward. Wherever the mist passed, light was consumed. The entire secret realm was quickly shrouded by that despairing tide. Lynn hovered, the glow of the protective sigil around him a lonely pinprick against the blood-dark backdrop. His face was unchanged, calm, cold as ice. His golden vertical pupils watched the patchwork monster's proclamations below. If one looked closely, they would see the fiery phoenix mark between his brows, flashing at an almost frantic pace. Each beat seemed to gather energy. Golden patterns like flowing lava appeared faintly on the skin around the mark. As the blood mist carried the monster's ceaseless words through the space. "Give up. Merge into this eternal sea of blood. Your flame will be extinguished. My darkness will last forever. I will use your body, your power, to forge my perfect." 3. A clear voice, cool with indifference, cut the words off. "What?" The patchwork monster blinked, confusion flitting across its face. What was the human doing? 2. Lynn counted without haste. Alarm finally registered in the monster's eyes. Something was wrong. Its connection to the blood pool had slowed, as if a thick membrane separated it from its own ocean. "Space is locked? Since when?" it snarled. The final count left no time for thought. Lynn watched the struggling creature and let a wild smile touch the corners of his mouth. Crack, crackle. A sound of shattering ran through his body. The layer of protective sigil on his surface broke apart first, turning into innumerable points of light. Then his skin, muscles, and bones, his entire self, like fragile colored glass, showed countless fine fractures. From those cracks poured a terrifying, blinding white light. An unbearable heat erupted around him. Space itself began to warp and collapse. Light was swallowed into a momentary sphere of absolute darkness, with only the white fire blazing from Lynn's broken body as its source. He looked once more at the patchwork monster trapped in the spatial lock and murmured, almost gently, "Art is an explosion." No words could capture what followed. First there was light, pure, all-consuming light bursting from the center of Lynn's fracturing body. It filled the chamber and spilled beyond, flooding every corner of the secret realm. Under that light, the blood mist, the blood pool, the carved stones, even the fabric of space lost color and shape, flattened into a field of absolute white. Heat and shockwave followed. In that white world, the blood pool vaporized in an instant. The self-proclaimed invincible patchwork monster didn't even manage a final scream before it was physically annihilated, as if it had never existed. The white blaze and the destructive wave seemed to last both forever and a single instant. When the all-consuming light finally began to recede, there was nothing at the center of the explosion. No Lynn, no monster, no blood pool, not even ground. It was as if everything had simply ended. Within that absolute nothingness, however, a tiny, faint flame flickered into being. 190, in the name of driftwood. The flame suddenly surged. Gold-red fire blossomed like a volcanic eruption, and amid the blaze, a faint silhouette of 50 crying out to the heavens could be made out. When the light died down, Lynn was standing in the same spot, unharmed, though a trace of exhaustion shadowed his face. Perched listlessly on his shoulder, Wuon's feathers, once as brilliant as morning sun, were now slightly dull. In its beak it held an utterly unremarkable seed. Lynn reached out, took the seed without looking closely, and tucked it into his inner pocket. He glanced once at the ruined chamber, gave his 24 a casual wave, and said, "Let's go. Staying here brings bad luck." A spatial ripple flickered and vanished. Lynn and Wuon disappeared as if they had never been there. Absolute silence held for about the length of a cup of tea. Then, a low spatial tremor appeared without warning. A faint, almost translucent light seeped from the void and slowly condensed. An ancient-looking scroll emerged and hovered in the air, radiating a sense of age and an indescribable, eerie presence. The scroll unfurled on its own. Its surface was not blank, but covered with dense, dizzyingly complex tonic circles, runic formulas, and long passages of ancient runes. When it finished opening, the diagrams and script flared with steady light. The light projected upward and condensed into a translucent humanoid phantom about the height of a person above the scroll, a male wizard in his 40s. He bore no fangs, no goblin features. He was a pure projection of a human wizard's consciousness. As soon as the phantom formed, he looked around with extreme tension. When he perceived the current state of the Levin, his expression collapsed. First came stunned bewilderment, as if nothing before him made sense. Then, like the silence before an eruption, "Fuck!" The phantom's roar was full of furious despair. Damn it, you little bastard. What kind of monster crawled out of a rock crack? My blood pool. The 9 I spent 300 years collecting. My stitched beast test subject. The goblins I finally trapped here to process slowly. All gone, blown to bits. Not even a scrap left for me. Like a gambler who had just lost everything, he launched into a frantic, undignified tirade. Obscure ancient curses and local swears punctuating a torrent of grief and rage. Several meaningless but emotionally charged cursing are omitted here. At last, the tirade petered out. The phantom sat in midair, dejected, face buried in his hands, trembling with impotent fury. After a long while, he lowered his hands and sighed. This is a mess. He hit too hard, left no room at all. Practically a robber, a bandit, an arsonist. He muttered a few more complaints, then forced himself to work. He began channeling the 22 stored in the scroll, trying to communicate with the remaining of the 11 to start a preliminary post-disaster reconstruction, at least to patch spatial cracks and stabilize the collapsing space. Restoring everything to its original state, that would be another several hundred-year project. For now, he could only reset traps, slowly rebuild, and wait for the next unlucky fool to stumble in. "What? You're not happy I tore down your crappy house?" a voice said from behind him. The phantom froze and turned stiffly. There, a few steps back, stood the bastard who should have been gone, Lynn, relaxed and half-smiling. Even worse, Lynn held the physical scroll that carried the phantom's consciousness and was casually toying with it. "You. Haven't you already?" the phantom began. "Left already? That's what you want to ask, right?" Lynn finished for him, lips curving. "Who told you that seeing is believing? Leave a realistic magical illusion to draw attention while the true body uses a little trick to hide nearby and watch the show. Aren't you the expert at that sort of deception? How can you not react when it's used on you, all these years, truly wasted?" The barb hit hard. Blood rushed to the phantom's face. Humiliation seared him. For a young wizard, barely showing a full head of hair to judge him so, how dare he? "You arrogant," he snapped. Enraged, the phantom instinctively reached to channel the offensive in the scroll to teach the boy a lesson. But Lynn was 10 times faster. He barely moved. He lifted his left hand, holding the scroll a fraction, while the 24 in his right hand was already aimed at it. With a soft poof, a cluster of fiend fire flared at the tip of the 24. Sizzle! Blue smoke rose, and the scroll's edges blackened and curled under the flames. Wait, stop quickly, let's talk this out. I was wrong, okay?" the phantom blurted, panic replacing fury. All thoughts of attacking vanished. He switched from rage to abject flattery in an instant. Wrong about what? Lynn moved the fiend fire a little farther away, but it continued to dance menacingly near the scroll. Wrong to attack you. I was blinded by greed. I didn't know what was good for me. The phantom scrambled, bowing and scraping. Lynn inclined his head as if placated, then, his 24 edging closer again, kept him on edge. Wizard's inner curse. Why are you nodding? Does nodding mean you agree, then keep burning it? I was wrong to curse you, lie to you, be self-righteous, treat you like an ordinary young 18. The phantom was so anxious he nearly dispersed. Lynn nodded again. The 24 approached for a third time. And? That. The phantom stammered, flustered. He had admitted not only the big things, but all the petty ones he could think of. Did he need to confess peeping at his neighbor bathing centuries ago? On the verge of a breakdown, he faltered. Lynn finally laughed. All right, I'm done teasing you. He flicked his wrist and quenched the fiend fire, but kept the scroll. We're both 18s after all. It was just a joke. What, isn't it funny? How could the phantom say no? He forced a smile so strained it looked like a grimace, managing a few dry chuckles. Today, he truly learned what it felt like to be meat on someone else's chopping block, completely controlled, utterly powerless. By the way, Lynn said, shaking the scroll in his hand, how did you get yourself into this state? This doesn't look like a Horcrux to me. The phantom fell silent then, with his physical vessel in Lynn's hands and secrets nearly exposed. He gave in. He sighed and began to explain. Long-winded praise of his own genius, technical details, omitted here, the process by which he avoided splitting his soul by creating a permanent alchemical vessel, the scroll, and a 21 to strip away consciousness, projecting his mind into the scroll to achieve another kind of immortality. After listening, Lynn concluded the man was a genius of a rotten sort. Bored by isolation, he had opened the realm to lure adventurers to find the scroll, which would reflect their innermost desires. Lennis's desire was to return to his original form. The phantom fabricated a restoration method to toy with him, even creating a body for himself should he ever want to go out. He didn't expect Lennis to make actual progress. The goblins wanted to restore their glory. The phantom wanted to see the outside world. That desire drove the goblin attack on the ammunition depot. Lynn's eyes narrowed. Then what about Professor Lupin? He asked. Why didn't you go after him? I saw how miserable he was and couldn't bring myself to trick him. I still have a conscience. Lynn was silent. Far away at Hogwarts, Professor Lupin, grading papers, sneezed without warning. Achoo! Strange. The weather's getting warmer, so why is Snape grumbling about his 19s again? He rubbed his nose and resumed burying his head in parchment. Seeing Lynn had no more questions, the phantom plucked up courage. Esteemed sir, I've told you everything, hiding nothing, so could you be merciful and give me my home back? He looked longingly at the scroll, utterly humble. Lynn blinked and then smiled. Sure, I'm a very reasonable person. The phantom's heart leaped, but before he could thank him, Lynn added, however, first, demonstrate that 0 you mentioned earlier. Once I've learned it, I'll naturally give it back. The phantom stiffened, suspicious. What, you don't believe me? Lynn seemed to read his thoughts. Although my methods can be a bit extreme, I'm a man of my word. If you don't believe me... He paused, feigning solemn thought, then raised 3 fingers and said mockingly, I swear by the name and life of Driftwood. The phantom fell silent. With his pride swallowed and his options thin, he forced a reply. Very well. I hope, Your Excellency, that you will keep your promise. 191. Don't worry about the details. Engrave successful, mental dwelling acquired. Lynn scanned the system prompt and told the male wizard, You taught well, I've already learned it. What? What? The male wizard nearly lost his composure, his voice cracking. You learned it? Just from watching me demonstrate how to enter and exit the scroll once? He'd poured endless effort into stumbling toward this exclusive technique, endured failure after failure to craft it, and this kid had watched a single demonstration and casually claimed he'd learned it? It stung worse than having his blood pool blown apart. Was he hearing things? Was Lynn bluffing? Otherwise, Lynn shrugged. The male wizard's mouth twitched. He wanted to protest, but any words felt feeble. Then you see this scroll? Oh, this. Lynn suddenly remembered he was still holding something, glanced down at the scroll, and then raised it casually. The male wizard's pupils dilated as he shrieked. No! Whoosh! Fiendfire burst from the tip of the wizard's staff again, but this time it didn't lick the air. It swallowed the scroll whole. No! You swore. You said you would return it to me. By the life of floating wood, you traitor. The male wizard's projection roared in despair and lunged at the flames, but his hand passed through them. The fiend fire mercilessly consumed the scroll that had carried the wizard's ambitions for immortality. The animal hide cover shriveled and blackened to ash under the heat. Metal fittings melted and dripped. The dark rollers cracked, fractured, and carbonized. Within moments, amid the projection's increasingly faint screams and curses, the scroll had been reduced to a handful of ashes that sifted through Lynn's fingers. Before it vanished entirely, the male wizard bellowed one final, venomous curse. You, demon! Your parents will surely die a horrible death. Lynn expressionlessly brushed the dust from his hands. Just empty threats. With the scroll gone, the unstable chamber, already trembling from the battle, lost its last support. The spatial barrier that had been holding the place together began to spiderweb with cracks. From those fissures, yellow bricks rained down like a waterfall. Surrounding walls started to collapse. Sand poured in from every direction, threatening to bury the whole place. Lynn scratched his head, a little exasperated. Tsk, this is getting a bit loud. Wuan, we can't stay here. Time to go back to the sanctum. This little borrowing trip was certainly eventful. With a flash of fire, before the cascading sand could swallow everything, Lynn vanished from the collapsing blood-sand corridor secret realm. Moments later, the corridor completely collapsed, burying all traces of them. Witnesses outside who saw the arcane chamber implode screamed in alarm. The Pharaoh has been resurrected. Hogwarts, Hufflepuff dormitory. The golden-red hearthlight warmed the center of the common room as Lynn reappeared. In his mind, Wuan's tired voice sounded, Master, the expenditure was too great. I'm going back to my nest to rest. Call if you need anything. Lynn answered silently, Thanks for your hard work. Get some good rest. It's because of you today. He couldn't help but smile. He'd truly exhausted his phoenix, long-range spatial tracking and sealing, then possession to trigger an ultra bomb. It deserved a proper rest. Edgar, absorbed in a game of wizard's chess with William, glanced up and froze at the sight of Lynn standing in the middle of the room, then asked in confusion, Lynn, didn't you say you were going into seclusion in the sanctum to tinker with that artificial rainfall project? We didn't see you after lunch. We thought you were down there the whole time. When did you go out? William noticed Lynn's coat, dusty and scuffed if you looked close, and added, You look like you just came back from a fight. Ollie only watched, worry flickering in his eyes. Lynn waved a hand offhandedly. Don't worry about the details. I've already sorted out the core equipment for the artificial rainfall. Sorted? Edgar's eyes lit up. So fast? You built a cannon that can summon wind and rain? Sort of, but it's more interesting than just a cannon. Lynn smiled and gestured toward the open doorway to his sanctum. Come on in. I'll show you something good. It'll open your eyes. The three exchanged looks and followed him into the sanctum. Dudu had set aside a special, large item storage and testing area. The space was vast and brightly lit. In the center, several metal cannons of various shapes, each cold and industrial, were arranged neatly. Beside them, wooden ammo crates bore different logos. When opened, they revealed brass shells and rows of slim rockets. In addition to the apparatus Lynn called his artificial rainfall cannons, there were other menacing weapons, artillery pieces, rocket launchers, a few heavy machine guns that could be mounted on military off-road vehicles. Lynn scanned the room and swore under his breath when he noticed a crate marked with a radiation symbol and a mysterious device sitting beside it. Goblins really had an eye for detail. Edgar, William, and Ollie gaped at the sight. Merlin's stockings, Edgar blurted, hurrying to one of the artillery pieces and circling it, too excited to touch. You made all of these yourself in the last few days? Lynn, you call this artificial rainfall equipment? This looks like gear for storming cities and taking fortresses, and in such a short time you built so many. William stood stunned, his glasses slipping as his voice trembled. Wait, Lynn, you said you were researching artificial rainfall technology, but these are clearly Muggle military weapons. Artillery, machine guns, rocket launchers. Where did you even get them? His look was no longer disbelief, but certainty and worry. Ollie didn't speak, but the expression on his face suggested he already pictured ministry officials at the door. Lynn put his hands down calmly. Relax. I borrowed them from the Muggle side. Borrowed? Edgar, less familiar with the Muggle world and used to Lynn's vagueness, automatically pictured an amicable exchange. Muggles are reasonable folk. William and Ollie stared. William nearly choked. Borrowed? You can borrow things like this? You must have serious connections. Lynn rubbed his nose. Like I said, don't worry about the details. He walked over to one of the artificial rainfall cannons and patted the barrel. The point is we now have a way to try to create a storm. Don't you want to see? I'll teach you how to use it. The principle is pretty simple, easier than a lot of spatial wards. Doo-doo, he called. Pop, Doo-doo appeared and answered respectfully. Master, Doo-doo is here. Move the cannons labeled meteorological and their special shells to the outdoor testing area, Lynn ordered. I'm going to give these gentlemen a lesson in Muggle basic meteorological physics and practical operations. Fire. 2. Fire. Ring, 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 ring. The crisp sound of the bell-ending class echoed through the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Professor Lupin had just snapped his textbook shut, and his final line, "That's all for today. Your homework is," hadn't even finished leaving his lips. Whoosh! A figure bolted up from the back row. Lynn snatched up the 6-6 he'd left at his feet, and in the same instant shoved quill and parchment into his bag, moving so fast he left an afterimage. He didn't wait for Lupin to dismiss the class. He was already charging for the door. Lynn, wait for us, Edgar cried, scrambling to pack his things. Why are you running so fast? Didn't we agree to go together? Outside, the wind was sharpening. Lynn went straight to the place where he'd buried the moonlight potion and fished an LCD-like screen from his pocket. He pointed it at the sky. Graphs and figures streamed across the display, analyzing cloud thickness, humidity, temperature gradients, high-altitude wind shear, meteorological parameters rolling by in rapid succession. A few seconds later, the screen spit out a series of conclusions. Real-time monitoring, cloud-type cumulus congestus, cumulonimbus, development phase. Cloud base height, approx 200 meters. Cloud thickness, approx 4,000 meters. Water vapor content, above average. Atmospheric instability energy, high. Prediction, 80% probability of thunderstorms within 2 to 3 hours. Precipitation efficiency may be low and localized. Possible dry thunderstorm. Based on current conditions, sufficient potential for artificial intervention. Tsk, figures, Lynn muttered, frowning. Another thunderstorm with no rain. Are you doing this just to spite me? He snapped the screen closed, a satisfied, confident smirk curving his mouth. Fine, if you won't fall on your own, I'll make you fall. He raised his voice. Doo-doo, snap. Doo-doo appeared at the call, dressed for action and wearing a surprisingly earnest expression. Doo-doo, bring out our big guns. Lynn pointed to the open ground ahead. I want to see what excuses the weather still has left today. Yes, master, Doo-doo replied, eyes lighting up at being part of the plan. It faced the opening of the 6 and snapped its fingers. Buzz, creak, light flickered inside. One by one, matte olive green. Swan unfolded and rolled out of the container in neat, orderly lines. Doo-doo controlled 4 anti-aircraft guns, which it placed in roughly symmetrical positions in the clearing, each muzzle angled high toward the darkening sky. Lynn moved between the guns for a final inspection. Carriages stable, elevation and traverse mechanisms smooth, loading systems functional, sights clear. Edgar, William, and Ollie came crashing through the bushes, panting. Edgar stared at the tall barrels and the complex control panels, practically vibrating with excitement. Ollie glanced from the gathering clouds to the guns and whispered, Lynn, I know we're testing this, but is this really safe at Hogwarts? It's all calculated, Lynn said without looking up, nodding after checking the last gun. He turned to his 3 roommates and Doo-doo, who were standing at attention, and clapped his hands. Edgar, northeast gun. William, northwest. Ollie, southeast. Doo-doo, southwest. They scrambled to their stations. Lynn took the center of the clearing, squinted at the roiling section of cloud directly overhead, and mentally ran wind speed and shell trajectory estimates. All units, attention. Target, the cumulonimbus directly overhead. Elevation, set to 55 degrees. Azimuth, hold. Understood, they responded, fingers on the handwheels as they adjusted elevation. Lynn strode to a stack of special ammunition boxes. With a flick of his 12, the lids popped open. Another flick and long, slender shells slid into the ready positions for each gun. As the crew prepared, Edgar, holding the traverse mechanism, asked practically, "Lynn, how many shells do we need to fire? Is there a set number? We can't just keep shooting forever, can we?" Lynn, eyes still on the sky, froze for a beat. He dug through memories he'd borrowed from the director, but found no clear operational manual for exact dosages or firing cadence. He made an embarrassed face, scratched his head, and glanced at the churning clouds and the 4 eager gunners. The equipment was prepped and the weather was right. He wasn't going to back down just because the manual lacked specifics. "Ahem," he said, forcing a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Standards exist, but the weather's dynamic. From this commander's on-site assessment, cloud development is vigorous and the need for catalyst is substantial. Operational policy is," he broke off and declared with conviction, "fire as you see fit. We'll judge by the results." Silence met him for a heartbeat. Then, as if to puncture the awkwardness, a blinding white flash tore through a gap in the clouds, followed a second later by a rolling peal of thunder. Lynn didn't hesitate. "On my command, fire! Bang! 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 Bang!" The 4 guns thundered almost at once, louder than the thunderclap. Flames and thick smoke belched from the muzzles. The carriages kicked back so hard the ground trembled. 4 shells ripped into the churning dark above. The launch smoke drifted away. They watched, straining for a reaction. Seconds stretched, 10 seconds, half a minute. The thunder trailed off. The clouds stirred, but no rain fell. "No reaction?" Edgar whispered uncertainly. Lynn's jaw tightened. He glanced up, then waved a fierce hand. "Continue. Fire for effect. Ready." His 12 flicked again. Ammunition lids popped. More shells slid into place. "Fire! Bang! 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 Bang!" The second volley, then a third, fourth, fifth. The fire was relentless. They barely counted how many volleys they had sent up. The boxes at their feet were empty, lids gaping. The barrels were scalding hot, heat rippling off them in visible waves. Everyone stood panting, watching the dark sky. When they finally paused and looked up, the clouds were no longer the same as before. 193. Animagus completed? What had once been just a mass of clouds now churned and surged violently. The cloud base pressed so low it felt as if it were trying to crush the castle. Its color shifted from gray-black to a heart-stopping ink. Lightning flashed constantly inside the layer, and the thunder no longer rolled intermittently. It became a continuous, unbroken roar. The electric charge in the air made the skin tingle. The hair on the 4 of them stood up on end. Dudu, of course, had no hair to lift. The wind stopped as if someone had cut it off. A deathly stillness settled over the sky above Hogwarts, so oppressive it was hard to breathe. The light dimmed rapidly, as if night had fallen early. Then crack! An unprecedented thunderclap ripped out of the clouds. This lightning was no longer white but a blinding blue-purple that turned the forbidden forest as bright as day. Edgar and the others shrank instinctively, necks drawn inward. The oppressive silence shattered. A gale rose from the ground in an instant, no longer a breeze, but a violent wind that howled from every direction. Trees in the forbidden forest were whipped into a frenzy. Some branches snapped clean off and were swept up into the air. Leaves, dust, and small stones were torn from the ground and spun into chaotic whirlpools. The wind tore at Edgar and the others and lifted them clean off their feet. Lynn stared at the scene and suddenly wondered if he'd gone too far with his cannon fire. "Dudo, take them back to the castle," he shouted. Edgar and the others wanted to refuse, but they were being blown about and could do nothing. With a snap of Dudo's fingers, they vanished. Raindrops the size of beans began to fall, hissing as they struck the still scorching cannon barrel and sending up little plumes of steam. In an instant, the rain intensified into a torrential downpour, driven sideways by the gale into sheets of white mist. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Lynn stood alone, letting the rain lash him. He waited a moment to calm his mind, then bent and dug into the mud until his fingers closed around a cold crystal vial. The potion inside had turned blood red. Without hesitation, he tilted his head back and drained it in one gulp. The instant the liquid hit his throat, numbness and stinging pain spread through his body. He forced the incantation out through clenched teeth. Amato, animo, animato, animagus. On the last syllable, thump, thump. A second heartbeat suddenly pounded in his chest, heavy and insistent, duetting with his original pulse. Then a wrenching, excruciating agony tore through him, as if countless hands were pulling, twisting, reshaping his bones, muscles, nerves, even his sense of self. Lynn gasped and trembled. His knees failed. He dropped to one knee in the mud. Rain blurred his vision. Cold sweat soaked through his tunic. He clenched his jaw and fought to keep consciousness. As he hovered at the edge of collapse, a cascade of images exploded before his eyes. He saw himself in a forest filled with birds, eagles, swallows, peacocks, sparrows, each wing beat and feather rendered in vivid detail. The vision sank and he was on the ground, watching land animals pass. Stags, foxes, cats feigning sleep, slow-crawling lizards, fur and eyes flashing like lanterns. Then the scene slipped underwater into a riot of color. Fish flicking tails, jellyfish pulsing, turtles paddling, and somewhere in the deep, a vague, colossal shadow moved. Am I dying? The thought rose unbidden. He roared and fought to straighten. He reached out and closed his hand into a fierce, clawing fist. With that motion, the pain and chaotic energy found a focal point and began to organize. A vibration came from deep inside him. He heard faint crackling as bones shifted and reshaped, muscle fibers rewove, his skin tingled and stretched. His soaked school robe and undershirt seemed to merge into his changing body, thread by thread, forming part of his new shape. The transformation accelerated. A ripping soreness erupted between his shoulder blades. Pitch-black feathers burst through his skin and grew rapidly in the driving rain. Among the ink-black plumage, a few deep blue and purple feathers glinted with an oily metallic sheen under flashes of lightning. Another bolt split the sky, perfectly lighting the world. His legs writhed as bones reformed and muscles tightened. His feet changed, skin darkened, toes lengthened and curved, talons grew sharp and dug into the mud. The transformation crawled up to his head. Skull and facial bones rearranged, mouth and nose pushed forward and hardened into a beak. His vision, hearing, and smell were rebuilt in a wholly new way. When the last feather finished growing and the last inch of skin was covered, the change completed. The chaotic visions faded, his consciousness cleared. Instinctively, he tilted his neck with a suppleness far beyond a human's and took an inventory of himself. A robe of pitch-black feathers covered him, shot through with the deep blue and purple sheens. He looked down at the limbs that held him up. Human feet had vanished, replaced by dark gray, tough-skinned legs ending in curved talons. Rainwater slid off the dense feathers, most of it shedding rather than soaking in. Have I turned into a raven? 194. My training. He focused intently, feeling the power coiled in the strong wings on his back. Making a slight adjustment of muscle, he swept his wings downward. Whoosh! A powerful gust surged from beneath him, whipping up puddles and torn leaves. In his animagus form, Lynn rose lightly into the air, instantly breaking free of the tree canopy and plunging into a sky still raked by rain and lightning. Raindrops struck his feathered body in a staccato clatter, most of them skittering off the tightly packed plumage. Only a faint dampness seeped through. The sensation of slicing through the air was nothing like flying as a human, far more direct, fluid, and immediate. Excited, Lynn beat his wings again and activated sonic flight. Boom! A sharp sonic boom cracked, nearly coinciding with a nearby thunderclap. In an instant, he became a dark blur, tearing through the curtain of rain at astonishing speed. He darted, twisted, and weaved through the lightning-slashed, wind-tossed sky. Bits of broken branch and flung stone whirled past, but relying on the animagus's excellent dynamic vision, the warning from Peter's jolt, and the precise control granted by perfect bodily control, Lynn dodged each hazard by a hair's breadth. He felt an effortless mastery over this body, as if he had always been born to it. Hovering beneath a churning black cloud, his wings vibrating at a furious rate to hold position, Lynn lifted a forewing and swept it down toward the trees below. The motion picked up and resonated with the lightning energy crackling between earth and sky. Crack! Crack! Several condensed blue-white bolts answered, far denser than natural lightning, and struck a few ancient trees already weakened by wind and rain. Where they hit, bark charred and burst apart, sap hissed as it vaporized, and white smoke unfurled. It really works. Lynn felt a rush of exhilaration. The effect of form resonance was unmistakable. Circling once more, he felt subtle new currents through the bird's body, and an idea took hold. If I can cast spells in my animagus form, then I can cast spells in my animagus form. Could I transfigure myself? Temporarily change this form's appearance? Wand, come, he called. A neat hole split open in the sod below, and his wand shot free, cutting through the rain to fly straight toward him. Lynn adjusted his posture and caught it midair. The sensation of gripping the wand shaft with talons was odd but secure. He hovered and began the incantation, tracing complex patterns through the sky with his claws while silently reciting the transfiguration words. Light flashed briefly. In the next instant, the bird's silhouette shifted. The wings grew broader and longer, the tail feathers shortened, the plumage on head and neck rearranged, and the beak curved sharper. In the blink of an eye, he had become a keen-eyed falcon. Success! Joy swelled in him. He flapped and tested the new posture. The falcon's flight style needed some getting used to. Then he noticed a problem. This externally imposed form, produced by transfiguration, was fundamentally different from the animagus change, which had been an innate, inside-out transformation. He found he had to devote part of his concentration to maintaining the transfigured shell, like wearing a coat that required constant magical reinforcement. While flying, he felt a faint sense of separation. It was not as effortless to control as the animagus form, and casting other spells while in that shelled state was noticeably harder. But something is better than nothing, Lynn told himself. It was an extra disguise option, temporary, draining, but potentially useful in a pinch. A few days later, on a Saturday morning that should have been lazy and bright, the sky over Hogwarts was still a slab of leaden cloud. Thunder rolled and echoed between the distant hills and the castle towers. The rain had toned down from the recent storm's fury, but showed no sign of stopping. Whatever had catalyzed the superstorm days earlier had left a persistent after-effect. The Black Lake had even flooded parts of the castle, and professors had been tied up for days guarding shorelines and dealing with mud and slippage. For the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, the weather was bad news. They had finally secured the pitch for a full day and planned an important tactical practice the whole team had been looking forward to. But with the rain still pouring and visibility low, safety forced a cancellation. The players who should have been roaring around the field were instead listlessly gathered in the common room. The storm, however, was a boon to the Gryffindor team. Captain Oliver Wood was a Quidditch fanatic through and through. Rain? No excuse. To him, training must go on. He believed practicing in the worst conditions hardened a team's will and adaptability. So when the Hufflepuffs gave up the pitch, Wood and his squad simply marched out into the rain and began their rain or shine drill. In a corner of the Hufflepuff dormitory, Edgar Burns, the team's beater, sank into a soft armchair and brooded. He wasn't tinkering with his bat or chatting. Arms folded, lips pressed tight, he fixed a resentful, accusatory glare on Lynn across the room, who tried to hide his face behind a copy of Advanced Potion Making. The stare was intense enough to feel physical, piercing the book's cover. At first, Lynn tried to ignore it and focus on a paragraph about moonstone solution stability. After a few minutes, the look got under his skin. The hairs at the back of his neck prickled, and the letters on the page seemed to swim. He snapped the book shut and looked up to meet Edgar's accusing eyes. "What are you staring at? Haven't you seen enough?" Lynn snapped. "Besides, wasn't that you having a blast back then? Firing at the clouds with your bat? Now you're blaming me?" Lynn wasn't wrong. In the Forbidden Forest, Edgar had shouted with excitement while operating his bat, urging more after each round. The others and Dudu had heard him. Edgar blinked, a shade of embarrassment crossing his face. He muttered, "I didn't know the consequences would be this serious back then. Who knew the rain would last this long and not stop? My training." Chot! Time flowed like the still waters of the Black Lake, drifting into late June between coursework, Quidditch, the occasional minor accident, and the faint excitement of the long holiday. The sky over the Scottish Highlands had finally shrugged off weeks of rain and revealed bright sunshine, but inside Hogwarts Castle, the air was taut with tension. Final exam week had arrived. The library was full, and the usual laughter in the common rooms had been replaced by hunched figures and clenched textbooks. Today was the Defense Against the Dark Arts practical. The corridor outside the classroom was crowded with third-year Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws, lining up to wait their turn. At last, the classroom door opened from the inside. Professor Lupin stepped out and stood before them, his eyes slowly sweeping the faces, nervous, expectant. He cleared his throat. Ahem. Quiet, everyone. The murmur died down at once. Lupin counted the students with a practiced calm and said, "This year's practical will take place inside this classroom. The rules are simple. Do your best and show the knowledge and skills you've learned this semester." He paused and softened his tone. "Safety first. If you truly feel you cannot handle it, you may opt out. There is no shame in that. I will grade you on your process and how you perform during your attempt. So relax. It should be treated like a special lesson." Those words let out a lot of held breath. "All right," Lupin continued, stepping aside from the doorway. "Line up in order and enter one by one." He led the way back into the classroom, and the door closed gently behind him. The students exchanged glances, each subtly hoping not to be first. In that silent, shifting hesitation, Lynn found himself inexplicably at the front of the line, facing the closed door. The classmates behind him fell back a little, their eyes fixed on his shoulders. Lynn blinked. "Seriously?" he said, turning to the others. "Go on, Lynn. Start us off," called a typically exuberant Hufflepuff boy. "We believe in you. You won a special contribution award," a girl added. A chorus of encouraging shouts rose up, perfectly synchronized and a little performative. Lynn's mouth twitched. Clearly they wanted a spectacle. He shrugged, knocked on the door 3 times, neither too soft nor too loud, and announced, "Professor, I'm coming in." Silence from within. Just when Lynn was about to knock again, Lupin's voice answered, "Come in." Lynn pushed the door open and stepped into the classroom. The desks and chairs had been moved aside, leaving a wide central space. Along one wall stood over a dozen large picture frames. Each painting was like a window, showing not landscapes, but lifelike magical creatures. Blood-stained red caps, hideous little goblins, horned grindylows, gnomes sticking out their bottoms as they wreaked havoc in a vegetable patch, floating ghouls. They covered almost every dark or troublesome creature they'd studied this term. Lupin stood by the portraits and gestured for Lynn to approach. "The exam works like this," Lupin explained. "Choose one of the creatures in these portraits, enter the simulated environment, and either defeat it or otherwise neutralize the threat it poses. I will grade you on your choice, your strategy, your spell work, and the outcome." He outlined the precautions. The interior of the portraits were special spaces protected by strong safety enchantments that could simulate the creature's behavior and environment while limiting actual damage. Basically safe. Then Lupin added in a quieter tone, "Try not to cause excessive or irreversible damage. Other students will need to use them." His gaze lingered on Lynn for a moment. Lynn bristled at the unspoken implication and protested, voice full of offended indignation. "Professor, am I that kind of person? I care about magical creatures and advocate peaceful coexistence." Lupin's face remained expressionless. He thought privately that if Dumbledore hadn't casually mentioned during a chat that a certain student had a habit of choosing thorough purification when dealing with sensitive magical items, he might have believed Lynn's act. Of course, he did not say that aloud. Seeing that Lupin simply stared back without answering, Lynn dropped the performance and scanned the portraits. Redcap, too weak. Grindylow, messy in water. Gnome, no real challenge. Ghoul, just disgusting. In the corner, a portrait of an old-fashioned wardrobe caught his eye. A boggart. Last class, the boggart had hidden in the wardrobe and refused to show him his greatest fear. He had been stewing about it ever since. This controlled exam was the perfect chance. "Professor, I'll take the boggart," Lynn said, pointing. Lupin nodded and tapped his wand. The frame around the wardrobe glowed faintly as the portal activated. Following Lupin's instructions, Lynn stepped forward and deactivated the portrait's absolute evasion safeguard. Prepared, he stepped through. The scene shifted. In the center of the room stood the familiar wardrobe. Lynn approached, heart thumping. What would the boggart become this time? Creak. The wardrobe door swung open from within. A cloud of black mist surged out and filled the space. As it thinned, the sight made Lynn's pupils constrict. 3 lifeless bodies lay on the floor. They were Edgar, William, and Ollie, faces pallid, eyes closed, robes stained with what looked like blood and dust, limbs splayed unnaturally. The realism was chilling. Edgar's freckles, William's glasses pushed to one side, Ollie's furrowed brow. Even knowing it was a boggart's illusion, the impact was raw and immediate. A white-hot rage shot up from Lynn's chest and seared into his head. He lifted his wand and for a moment stammered over a spell. Anger broke the spell words. He cursed instead. The air ignited. Fiendfire flared into being and tore through the portrait space, ruthless and indiscriminate. The flames engulfed the three figures and consumed the wardrobe. The fire blazed and vanished as quickly as it had come. When the embers died, nothing remained of the boggart or the furniture. The floor looked scorched clean, as if some overwhelmingly destructive cleaning charm had been applied. Outside the classroom, the waiting students heard a muffled commotion, then silence. Lupin, standing just beyond the portrait, watched the scene inside for a long beat. He looked at Lynn, who now wore an expression that said, "That felt better," and then at the excessively clean, singed space. For several seconds, he simply had no words. Finally, he picked up his quill, drew a large O on Lynn's report, and said in a flat voice, "Because Lynn excessively destroyed teaching equipment during the exam, 10 points from Hufflepuff." Business done. Lupin put away his quill and sighed inwardly as he stared at the empty portrait. He was already thinking about how to tell the next students that the boggart option would have to remain temporarily closed. 196. Loyalty, loyalty. Woo, woo, woo. With steam hissing and metal ringing, the Hogwarts Express pulled away from the Hogsmeade platform, bound for King's Cross. Inside one compartment, the annual "What are you doing for the holidays?" interrogation began on cue. Edgar leaned toward Lynn, who watched the countryside blur past the window, his face alight with anticipation. "Lynn, what are your plans for the break? If you haven't decided, why don't you come with us to the Quidditch World Cup? I heard this year's preparations are massive. It's going to be incredible." Lynn tore his eyes away from the window and considered for a moment. "I don't really have anything specific planned right now," he said with a shrug. "But who knows? The holidays are long. Something might come up. We'll see. Besides, the finals are ages away." Meanwhile, far to the southeast in Norfolk, in a place removed from both wizarding bustle and muggle settlements, a lone Victorian manor crouched among wooded hills. Ivy clung to its outer walls, and most of the windows were shut, giving the house a hushed, secluded look. Any wizard who approached would sense layers of protective wards, concealment charms, muggle-repelling charms, and even older, darker, offensive enchantments, so many that the manor was effectively closed off from the world. Its true secrets lay below. A dim hallway and a hidden stone stair led down to a cold, damp cellar, nearly free of natural light and lit only by an oil lamp set into a wall niche. In the center of the room, a heavy chair was bolted to the flagstones. Bound to it was a man, perhaps 30, perhaps younger. Long confinement had hollowed his face and made his age hard to tell. His blonde hair was pale, his cheeks deeply sunken, and dark circles framed his eye sockets. Most disturbing of all were his eyes, vacant, unfocused, staring into empty air, a typical sign of long-term control by the Imperio. Then, in a single instant, that hollowness flickered. His lips trembled, and he cried out, "Mas! Master!" The shriek startled the house elf who had been curled in the corner shadows. "Yo, young Master, awake? Merlin! Master said Winky must find Master immediately. Find Master Barty Crouch to reinforce the spell." Winky bolted upright, trying to apparate a way to report. On the chair, Barty Crouch Jr., newly broken free from the long suppression of the Imperio, heard the words and snapped back to himself. "Winky, stop! You are not allowed to go to Crouch. Obey my command." Winky's motion froze. On one shoulder sat the strict, current instruction from its present master, Barty Crouch Sr., to guard and report at once. On the other, the urgent order from the young master forbidding it to go. Winky is a bad elf," it whimpered, then suddenly turned and smashed its head against the nearby wall. Bang! Winky disobeyed Master's orders. Bang, bang! Young Master's orders, Winky must obey too. Winky bad. Winky deserves to die. Barty watched without evident alarm. If anything, his expression showed admiration. He pulled his lips back into a wild laugh. "Ha ha! Ha ha! Loyalty! This is loyalty. Winky, your loyalty to your master and my loyalty to my master are the same. The same." His laughter echoed oddly in the empty cellar. "I can do it too. For Master, I can do anything. I can endure any pain. Ha ha ha!" He convulsed with manic excitement, the ropes cut into his skin. Then the laughter stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and his face smoothed into a more sober expression. "That's right, master, my master," he murmured, then raised his voice. "Winky, tell my master, the great dark lord, where is he now? Where is he?" Winky hesitated, voice thin as a mosquito's buzz. "Yo, young master, so someone said he is in the forests of Albania. Take me there, no, let me go." With a soft crack, Barty apparated, arriving alone in Albania, in the heart of an ancient, seldom-trod forest. Having just been freed from years of confinement, his steps were unsteady. He steadied himself by gripping a rough trunk. His eyes, unused to daylight, pinched against the dim light, but he barely noticed. He drew in the air of freedom, spread his arms, and shouted with a worshipful, ringing voice, "Ha! I'm free! I'm free! Great master, your faithful servant, your most devoted believer, Barty Crouch Jr. I have come to find you. I have come to welcome your return." Not far away, in the shadow of a massive tree root where almost no light reached, something that had been curled up raised its head at the sound. "Who is calling me?" a voice rasped. Barty's body trembled, not with fear but with rapture. He lurched forward, stumbling across dead leaves until he fell to his knees before the shadow. Master? Is it you? It's your voice. It's me, Barty, your most loyal servant." The shadow shifted and writhed, a darker mass taking on a grotesque outline, crawling across the moss and detritus like a thing hardly held together. "Barty, Crouch Jr.?" Lord Voldemort's voice, thin and suspicious, issued from the dark. "You should be dead, in Azkaban, with those useless refuse." "No, master, I didn't." Tears spilled down Barty's cheeks. "It was my father, that hypocrite. He used a dying woman, to replace me with Polyjuice. He hid me at home, used Imperio to control me. But I never forgot you, master. I prayed for you every day, waiting for the chance to serve." He poured out his story in a rapid, frantic rush. There was no fear there, only reverence and the conviction that his master's present weakness was a temporary trial that he, Barty Crouch Jr., was destined to remedy. Without waiting for orders, he dragged himself forward and bowed, his knees scraping the earth. "Master, your humble servant has finally returned. This is only a temporary predicament. Let me fix it for you. I know how. We can rebuild a new body for you. I need only some materials, some time. I thought about this every day in prison. I studied everything I could find. Please, master, give me this chance. Let me serve you." Silence fell. The rasping voice returned at last, carrying a command that brooked no argument. "Rise, my faithful servant. I believe in your loyalty." 197. Black Mark. Late one night, a few days later, everything was quiet. The phone shrilled, a sharp, merciless sound that tore Lynn out of a dream in which he was in a tug-of-war with a giant deep-sea fish. He blinked blearily at the caller ID. Ellie. His heart gave an odd, unnecessary lurch. He snatched up the receiver. "Boss, something's wrong." Ellie's voice trembled down the line, a crowd murmuring faintly in the background. "The shop! It's been attacked! It's on fire! It's all pitch black." Lynn was awake in an instant. Attacked? Who would do this? "Stay there. I'm on my way." Before Ellie could finish, he hung up. His wand was already in his hand. Crack. He was gone. He appeared in Diagon Alley, the air thick with the acrid sting of smoke. He stood in front of his shop and felt his pupils tighten. The bright, neat facade he knew so well had been devastated. Charred black spreads crawled inward from doorframes and window edges. The panes were gone, leaving jagged, soot-darkened frames. The sign that once read, "Epoch-making," was smudged by soot. The smell of burnt wood and molten metal mixed with a sharp, chemical tang. The shops on either side were untouched. Their windows held the same dust as always. The precision of the damage was ridiculous, the malice unmistakable. Ellie stood near the doorway, distraught, explaining something urgently to a pair of aurors. "I just remembered I left a draft stock list in the counter drawer and came back tonight to fetch it. I saw smoke and light as soon as I reached the alley entrance. I ran over, and it's like that. I swear," she blurted. One auror took notes while the other waved the glowing tip of his wand along the shop's exterior, searching for magical residue. Lynn swallowed the anger and the flood of questions and hurried over. Ellie looked like she had seen a savior. Her eyes reddened as she hurried forward. "Boss!" He nodded once to calm her, then addressed the aurors as composedly as he could. Good evening. I'm the owner, Lynn. What happened here? The lead Auror gave a brief rundown. About half an hour earlier, patrolling Aurors and nearby residents had spotted the fire. The blaze was extinguished by the ministry's accident department, but the damage was done. Traces of suspected arson and dark arts residue were found. Ellie, as the first witness, was undergoing routine questioning, and the Aurors had tentatively ruled her out as a suspect. The official tone stayed even as the lead Auror closed his notebook. Mr. Lynn, we understand this is distressing. The ministry will fully investigate and will bring the perpetrators to justice, he said. Then he signaled his companions. They were preparing to apparate back to the ministry to file their report. Please wait a moment, Lynn called. The captain turned back. Is there anything else, Mr. Lynn? Lynn paused, then asked plainly, If you catch the culprit, what kind of punishment would they usually face? The Auror captain assumed the owner wanted to understand the legal consequences and replied professionally. For intentional arson, destruction of commercial property, endangering public safety, and the use of dark arts, the usual sentence is long-term imprisonment in Azkaban, depending on circumstances and losses. They would also be required to provide financial compensation enforced by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Azkaban and fines. Lynn was silent for a moment. I understand. Thank you. We'll take our leave then. Keep in touch. Any new clues, please inform us promptly. With that, the Aurors apparated away. Only Lynn and a shaken Ellie remained, facing the blackened ruin. Ellie, he said, thank you for coming back. You must have been terrified. Go home and rest. I'll handle things here. You don't need to come back until renovations are finished. Your pay will be as usual. Consider it a paid leave. After Ellie disappeared around the corner, Lynn pushed open the warped, charred door and stepped into the ruined main hall. He headed straight for the hidden entrance to the basement. Good. The golems are fine. At least that was something. The underground workshop was bright and clean. The 100 alchemy golems worked quietly at their posts. Lynn went to the compartment where security records were kept. Several precise alchemical devices continuously recorded and backed up footage from inside and outside the shop. At the main console, he waved his wand. A light screen unfolded. He pulled the timeline back to the minutes before the Aurors arrived and let the footage run forward. It showed the Aurors arriving, Ellie making the call. Then it snapped to the moment the attack began. The peaceful counters and shelves were suddenly lit by a burst of light from the front door as two hooded figures rushed in. One was hunched, the other short and stocky. They headed straight for the counter where the galleons were kept. They tried everything to open the cash box and failed. Humiliated, they flew into a rage. Wands flashed as they hurled flames at shelves, counters, and displays. Whatever the flames touched, wood, metal, alchemicals, ignited, popping and belching black smoke. At one point, one of the attackers rolled up a sleeve as if it interfered with his wand hand. On the inside of the forearm, clearly revealed in the recording, was a glaring mark, a skull with a snake protruding from its mouth. Lynn's eyes widened. The dark mark. He had never had any dealings with Death Eaters. Had he provoked them somehow? It didn't appear so. He ground his teeth. He closed the light screen with a hard wave of his wand. Azkaban? Fines and compensation? No, that would be letting them off far too easily. 198. That's too presumptuous. The next morning, before dawn had fully chased away the chill of night, Lynn stood at the gates of Malfoy Manor. He had slept almost none, anger keeping him awake, and now found himself in the great drawing room opposite Lucius Malfoy, who'd been roused from bed and still looked half asleep. Lucius wore an elegant morning robe, and his hair was perfectly arranged, but the fatigue in his eyes was plain. A house elf arrived silently with 2 steaming cups of strong black tea and vanished again into the tapestried shadows. For a long moment, the only sound in the vast room was the faint crackle from the fireplace, and the atmosphere felt oddly strained. Lynn scratched his head, watching Lucius struggle to stay awake and suppress a yawn. He cleared his throat and struck the right balance of apology and purpose. Mr. Malfoy, I'm sorry to have bothered you so early. You don't look rested. Perhaps you should go back to your room and sleep a little more. I can come back later. Lucius's eyelids twitched. Come back later? I got out of bed for nothing? He reached for a small vial on the side table, The house elf had just set it down, uncorked it, and drank it in one decisive gulp. The potion hit him with an immediate shudder. A foul smell, like old socks and booba-tuber pus, rose from his stomach and made him fight the urge to gag. He glanced at the bottom of the empty vial and read the tiny engraved line, "Specially brewed, awakening draught, Master Potioneer Severus Snape." His cheek muscles twitched. The taste was unforgettable, but Snape's draught worked as advertised. A cool clarity swept through his mind, banishing the last of the grogginess and sharpening his thoughts until he was almost too alert. He lifted his teacup, sipped with a practiced air, and replaced his usual smile. "You flatter me, Mr. Lynn. Visits to Malfoy Manor are not disturbances. As your business partner and the host, I can assure you we are always happy to receive guests." Lynn nodded inwardly. Good. He drew out his 18, swiped it to life, and without preamble pulled up a video, sliding the device across the table to Lucius. The screen began to play. A hooded figure lurched through a shop, waving a 21 that spewed flames and wrecked everything in sight. The footage cut to a close-up of the inner left forearm, a mottled, unmistakable dark mark. Lucius's pupils tightened almost imperceptibly at the sight. His smile didn't vanish, only froze for a breath as a cautious look took hold. He watched closely, even replaying a segment. Thoughts clicked into place with characteristic efficiency. Why would Lynn come directly to me with footage of a Death Eater attacking his shop? Does he suspect I ordered it? No, there's no motive to sabotage our profitable arrangement. But the man, there was something vaguely familiar. Lucius glanced up at Lynn, masking interest with mild puzzlement. "Mr. Lynn, this is..." Lynn hedged the question like a respectful gambler. "Mr. Malfoy, forgive me if I'm being presumptuous, but you had that particular time in your past. I thought you might recognize faces from Lord Voldemort's followers. Do you know this man in the video? Or does he remind you of anyone?" Lucius's internal reply was blunt. "You are extremely presumptuous." Still, he arranged his expression into a pained, helpless look and spoke carefully. "Mr. Lynn, you must be joking. That was a regrettable period. Many of us were under the imperious curse, forced to do things against our wills. The ministry judged the matter." Lynn paused, considering his next move. In that silence, a chill ran up Lucius's spine. Then he made, in his estimation, the most prudent choice. The pained expression faded and was replaced by a strain of forced remembrance. "However," he began slowly, "the build, the way he moves, and particularly his manner of attack, I have a vague impression. I might have glimpsed something like it during those controlled times." He pointed at the screen. "Those two resemble members of the Caro family, Amicus Caro and his sister, Alecto Caro. They were fervent followers back then. Their methods were rather extreme." Lynn's chest gave a small, satisfied lift. "Amicus and Alecto Caro. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Malfoy. That's very useful." He set his apron back in his pocket with brisk, efficient motions. "Sorry to disturb you so early. Now that I have a lead, I won't keep you. I'll come by again when there's news." He rose to leave. "Mr. Lynn, wait." Lucius's voice stopped him. "It's rare you visit, and since it's morning, Draco's cooking has improved significantly. His stargazy pie has reached, shall we say, masterly level. The house elves rave about it." Lynn, already at the door, froze. His mind flashed back to his last visit. Fish heads poking through pastry, their eyes staring up from the crust. The image was vivid enough to make his skin crawl. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Malfoy," he called without turning, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "An urgent problem at the shop needs my attention. I must go soon, another time. I promise." He didn't wait for a reply. With that, Lynn bolted out of the manor, leaving Lucius standing in the warm, quiet room. Deep in the cairngorms of the Scottish Highlands, far from the main hiking paths and tucked beneath a leeward cliff, a rugged, gloomy castle stood stubborn and isolated. A Fidelius charm cloaked it from the outside world, making it look like nothing more than an impenetrable rock face or an ordinary stand of trees to any passerby. Inside, siblings Amicus and Alecto Caro sat hunched around a wooden table. Scattered across it were stained parchments, failed business plans, and half-burned drafts of menacing letters, along with a few empty wine bottles and a handful of galleons. The two of them stared at the small pile of coins as if they might multiply if they concentrated hard enough. Since the Dark Lord's fall, their fortunes had been crumbling. Running an honest business required patience, brains, and a reputation they no longer had. Their few schemes, intimidating shopkeepers for protection or fencing dubious dark arts objects, had either led to ministry involvement or collapsed under the weight of their own notoriety. Rather than make money, they'd lost more. To cover the gaps, they'd been forced to sell ancestral items and property for a fraction of their worth to other pureblood families. Their savings were nearly gone. "Big brother, we don't have many galleons left," Alecto said, stopping her nervous picking at the table. "I'm afraid we'll barely manage to get to Nocturne Alley next month to restock on essentials." Amicus slammed his elbow on the table with a dull thud. "Damn it! Damn them all!" he bellowed. "Those cowards, those traitors, those money-grubbing vultures, and that damn shop, couldn't they even open a simple box?" Their attempted robbery had been a humiliation. They'd expected to be the ones doing the taking. Instead, they'd been thwarted. It stung worse than any failed business venture. While they fumed, far above the Cairngorms, a figure hovered in the cold air. Lynn hung suspended over the mountains, the system prompt chiming in his mind like an unobtrusive reminder. Ding, mission issued. Mission objective, make your enemies feel pain. Mission reward, curse chain effect. When targets are afflicted by the same curse, the spells you cast can chain together. Guess what this thing can be used for? Funny face. He glanced at the mission and dismissed it, then looked down. Several groups of hikers were making their way up the ridge, backpacks bulging. Troublesome. He flicked his wand downward. Silent ripples spread out from him as the muggle-repelling charm slipped into the area. The hikers stopped, paused as if something made them reconsider their path, then turned back and began to descend. The slope fell still again. Lynn began a meticulous search. He swept his gaze over every cleft of rock, every opening in the trees, every pile that looked like a natural formation. He flew slowly and deliberately. After a full circuit, he still found nothing. No manor, no courtyard, nothing to betray the presence of a house. The mountains stayed mute. "Not here?" he muttered, hovering in the air. Lucius Malfoy wouldn't have lied, unless it's hidden very, very well. Fidelius' charm or some other advanced concealment? Then he remembered a concealment-breaking trick Quirrell had once taught him, exactly the sort of bait he needed. He raised his wand and shouted, "More Smordre!" A green light shot from the tip of his wand into the clouds above. The sky took on a lurid hue as a giant skull of green fire formed, its mouth spitting a writhing green serpent, the Dark Mark. It hung, shimmering and unmistakable, high over the Cairngorms. Inside the castle, Alecta, who had been staring at her brother, turned toward the high window as the green glow bled through. She froze, then leaped to her feet, trembling with excitement, and pointed at the sky. Master! Big brother, look! It's the Master! The Master is calling us! The mark! The Master's mark!" Amicus's anger vanished the moment he saw it. He laughed, a raw, thrilled sound, and sprang up. "Alecto, quick, let's go! The Master has returned! He's summoning his loyal servants. We've waited too long, far too long." Reason evaporated beneath overwhelming joy. Thoughts of galleons, of hiding, of prudence, all were shoved aside for the single imperative: answer the Master's call at once. The door was flung open. The Carrows scrambled out, faces alight with frenzy, and tore through the trees toward the place under the fading skull, shouting and stumbling. "Master, we're here! Your most loyal servants. Amicus and Alecto Carrow at your service. Master, wait for us." They arrived in the clearing to find a lone figure standing beneath the dissipating mark, his back turned to them, head tilted as if drinking in the power and menace of the symbol. Seeing him there, both Carrows immediately decided he must be another follower summoned by the Master, a fresh recruit. Their seniority and long habit of arrogance made them assume priority. They were not a little intoxicated by the idea that their Master had returned, and that convinced them they deserved deference. "Oi, kid, what are you doing standing there like an idiot? Didn't you see your betters coming? Move," Amicus barked, tone full of insolence. "Exactly. This isn't a time for daydreaming," Alecto added. "Scram, you nobody." They took their place between the newcomer and the direction of the fading mark, making no effort at courtesy to the man who blocked their path. Lynn turned slowly at their shouting. His gaze swept over them, one thin and bent like a scarecrow, Alecto, The other squat and brutish, small, piggish eyes sunk into puffy cheeks. Definitely Amicus. The descriptions Lucius Malfoy had given him and the silhouettes from the surveillance footage matched perfectly. These were the two he'd been looking for. Any residual doubt vanished. By the time either of the Caros registered how calmly he had turned, the hand that held Lynn's wand was already up. He spat. Crucio. A scarlet beam shot out, laced with an unnatural, persistent edge, a curse the system had flavored with an immortal component. It struck Amicus full in the chest. Amicus screamed as the Cruciatus took hold. 200. Lightning chain. Everything happened too fast, like a bolt out of a clear sky. One moment, Amicus Caro was still putting on the arrogant air of a senior, and the next, he was curled on the ground like a lump of rotten meat, howling inhumanly. The Crucio had stripped him of any ability to resist or think. The change wiped the smugness from Alecto Caro's face and left only terror. She glanced at her brother, still writhing on the ground, and reflexively raised her wand, ready to strike. Would Lynn give her that chance? Of course not. The instant a flicker of light formed at the tip of Alecto's wand, Lynn flicked his own. There was an almost inaudible, sharp sound in the air, and the power of an immortal curse slid on like a shadow. An invisible blade tore through at a speed the eye couldn't follow. Poochie. Alecto felt a strange, brief dislocation in her left shoulder, then an explosion of pain. Her left arm, still gripping the wand, was cleanly severed at the shoulder. It arced through the air and thudded onto the grass a few paces away. Even the fingers kept their curled hold on the wand, twitching twice. Blood gushed from the stump like a broken dam, instantly splashing half her body in the ground scarlet. Ah! Alecto's scream was higher, sharper than her brother's, saturated with a terror that reached bone. Dizziness from the pain and blood loss almost toppled her. Worse than the agony was the crushing way Lynn regarded her, treating her like an insect. Resist? The thought died as pain and the shadow of death closed in. The last of her ferocity evaporated. Survival instinct overwhelmed everything. Clutching her bleeding stump and fighting waves of faintness, she lunged forward. Thud! She dropped to her knees, facing Lynn, then began kowtowing desperately, forehead slamming the earth with dull thuds. After a few blows, her face was smeared with mud and grass, mixed with her own blood, and she looked utterly wretched. Spare me, my lord. Spare my life. We were wrong. We were blind. I beg you, please let me go. I'll do anything. Take everything. Just let me live. Lynn was momentarily taken aback by the crude finality of her begging. He clicked his tongue. Tsk, how boring. His voice carried a mock regret, as if the scene had failed to entertain. From the way you acted a moment ago, I thought you'd at least put up some symbolic resistance, or throw out a few nasty words. I never expected you'd kneel so easily. He dragged out the last words, savoring them. Alecto looked up in elated surprise, eyes fixed on his mouth, praying for words like forgiven or mercy. Lynn's next move shattered that hope. He gave his wand a casual wave. Amicus, still twitching from the Crucio, was hoisted up and slammed down in front of Alecto with a bone-jarring crash that kicked up dust. The siblings rolled together in a pitiful heap. Lynn waved his wand again. Boom! Dark red fiendfire erupted from nowhere around the Caros. The flames spread and leaped as if alive, forming an airtight ring that trapped the two inside. Heat warped the air. Sparks popped and crackled. From inside the blazing circle came Lynn's voice. Don't you two love setting fires? Especially fiend fire, burning other people's work to ash, watching their property turn to nothing? He tilted his head, looking at the faces contorted with fear inside the flames. Then I'm sure you'll enjoy the way you die by being burned alive. He flicked his wand upward like the final command. The ring answered instantly, flaring up violently. Flames lunged inward with brutal force. No! Alecto's scream was a howl of absolute despair. Ah! Amicus roared as the imminent pain of death eclipsed the Crucio's torture. The fire devoured hair, skin, and clothing. Flesh sizzled in the intense heat. Fat melted and fed brighter tongues of flame, while the air filled with the acrid stench of char. Lynn watched, detached, as the two rolled and shrank into black silhouettes. Ding! Mission completed. Rewards have been distributed. As their lives ebbed, with the flames climbing and their screams faltering, Lynn's brow suddenly tightened. Then, with a roar of power, something erupted inside Amicus and Alecto. A magical force punched through part of the Fiendfire's suppression and condensed in midair. A huge, dark green skull formed, hanging above the inferno. Lynn flashed to the side as the skull opened its cavernous maw, and a sucking force aimed straight at the two people in the flames. Slurp! The Fiendfire and the burned bodies were yanked up by the skull's suction and floated toward its mouth. Alecto, near fainting from pain and smoke, found a last furious burst of strength. As she was pulled into that ghostly light, she twisted toward Lynn and spat out one final provocation, voice ragged. See? See that? The Dark Lord. Come to save us. You're finished! Ha ha ha. In her mind, this had to be a miracle, her master intervening to rescue his most loyal servants. Lynn stood where he had been. He watched the skull trying to snatch his prey and heard Alecto's dying boast without a flicker of emotion. Snatch someone from right under my nose? Did you ask me? Before the last syllable fell, he raised his wand and pointed at Alecto as she flew toward the skull. Avada Kedavra. A blinding green beam shot from the tip of his wand. The air around it seemed to freeze. The skull wavered for a moment, but it was only a magical construct or a remote projection, not a solid thing. The killing curse passed through the hollow of that crouching skull with no obstruction and struck Alecto full on. All sound snapped off. The last light in her eyes went out. But the green light did not simply die with her. Something drew it on. A matching green beam surged from Alecto's corpse and, in a fraction of a second, zigzagged to hit Amicus, who was still near the skull. Everything unfolded in the blink of an eye. The skull shuddered violently, then collapsed inward. In the next instant, the floating Fiendfire and the Caro's bodies that had been pulled up vanished with it.